afternoon, everybody. So this is going to be a little bit different for us at Virginians for Children's First. So the JCAR, the Joint Commission on Rulemaking, that had the absolutely abhorrently disgusting unconstitutional hearing with the ACLU in Equality, Virginia, where Amy Gadara was there for about 15 minutes. Got her butt blown out of the water because she has no clue what the law is or anything about education policy. But I finally got the video back thanks to a couple wonderful, actually one wonderful senator. So I did a show before Christmas giving you an update of what happened during the hearing. And now that I have the video back, in case it goes away again, so this is going to strictly, I'm going to live stream the video with no commentary because that I would be here all night if I made commentary. That way it's on public record. It's in a couple different places. Everyone has access to it. So this is again the JCAR, the Joint Commission on Rulemaking. So this would have been Delegate Head, who is from Botetourt. Thumbs up. Wonderful dude. Like totally, he's the only one that from the beginning was like, why are we here? The law has been written. Why are we here? And of course, Cree Deeds has got to go. That man violated, like, I tell people this, it was like being sexually assaulted as a parent, sitting there watching yourself get your rights ripped away from you and having people cheering it on, and nobody doing anything about it. It was the most disgusting thing, and you can watch for yourself. And then what I'm going to do is play it all the way through. It'll be on YouTube. That way it's on public record. And then I'm going to come back, and probably not today because this is going to be like 2 hours long. So that way you can come in, go back and forth. It is going to play live all the way through. But it will be on YouTube for public record. But this was, you can watch and write down how much ridiculousness honey, go back in there. Thank you. I'll be right there. Okay. But so that's what this is not going to be me. Oh, hold on. This is just going to be the video playing all the way through, and then I'm going to come back through probably tomorrow and talk about it. But all this is going to be, I'm going to remove myself from the screen, is going to be this video. So
Good morning. Senator
I just want to show
Cosgrove,
you roll call.
Senator Eben,
Evan,
Senator Edwards, Senator Locke, Delegate Bagby, Delegate Head, Delegate Robinson, Delegate Rome,
Here.
Delegate Walker,
Present.
Delegate Wampler, Vice Chair Helmer, Chair Deeds.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, in 2002, the judge.
Okay, so I just wanted you to hear the roll call. And then now this was deliberately done, is that they had a mind-numbing Reggie energy hearing for the first, which they had plenty of time to do. Everybody had their full commenting period. Online, audio, I mean, whoever wanted to speak, full, but when it came time, they had everybody who wanted to comment that was waiting. How many? I know hundreds of parents that wanted to comment that never got time because they had so little time that even those of us that were in public or there in person, only our 3 minutes went to 2 minutes. So this was done on purpose, keep in mind. So I'm going to skip through the first, 2 hours. You can see I'm not happy this entire time. Okay, so they're still talking about climate. See, all these people spoke and they had plenty of time. To talk about Reggie and about, you know, energy and how mad they were about energy. Everybody had plenty of time. Okay, so this would be, I think, all right, so I'm just gonna remove myself, and this is at hour 41. So I don't know if I'm gonna I might have to let this thing play for 3 hours, as long as my connection stays and nothing messes up. So if any of you guys watch this and know me and something happens to the live stream, let me know, because I'm not gonna sit here and watch it. I watch the whole thing in person. So I'm gonna jump off. I'm gonna let you guys watch it. And then if you catch it in the middle, you won't be able to rewind. Just wait till it's over. You can go to YouTube, you'll be able to go to Facebook, and then our Twitter also. And I'll put all that information up if you don't have the accounts for those. And then it will be ready for anybody to watch. So you've got Mamie Locke, Lamont Bagby, Cree Deeds, Rome, and Evan, who were the 5 who voted to violate the 14th Amendment. It doesn't matter. This was essentially just a fluff and mutter. But knowing the state that we are in, being a year after inauguration, and nothing's been done to help our children or schools, who knows what they're going to turn this into. So everybody has to watch it for themselves. So here we go. If anything happens, like I said, let me know, and I will jump in and try to fix it.
Dignity and respect of all students and parents in Virginia's public schools. Mr. Wheeler.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Head.
Yes, before we even get started, I'd like a little clarification I don't know that I want to bring it as a point of order, but just, you know, with JCAR's authorization in the Code of Virginia, giving us the authority to review existing agency rules or regulations and defining that as something that has the force and weight of law. And since what we're looking at with this particular issue is nothing more than a model policy that is still in the draft stages and not a regulation that is being promulgated, I'm wondering why this is even coming before JCAR, because it seems that it pretty clearly exceeds JCAR's authority in every way that I can see in code.
Well, Delegate Head, that's an issue I've thought a lot about. 30-73.1 of the Code of Virginia says that JCAR can review existing rules, agency rules, regulations, and practices, and agency rules or regulations during the promulgation or final adoption process, and make recommendations to the Governor and General Assembly, and defines rules and regulations as any statement of general application having the force of law affecting the rights or conduct of any person adopted by an agency in accordance with the authority conferred on it by applicable basic laws. You know, my view, my ruling is that this is properly before JCAR. Now, you are correct. What JCAR can do is pretty limited. We can object to the implementation of a rule. We can object to a regulation. We can ask the governor to concur that it be suspended until the end of the next General Assembly session. We have a very limited authority on what we can do, but I think we can properly look at this.
But again, Mr. Chair, if this is not, it is neither a rule nor regulation with a general application having the force of law, which is specifically what was referenced in that code section that gives us the purpose. I appreciate you've made the ruling. I just, for the record, would like to state that I strongly disagree with that opinion. But
there are motions you can make.
Chair Edwards. Delegate Rome has her hand up.
Delegate Rome, I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I would just say to the delegate from Botetourt on this, I'll just quote a part from the Washington Post. that came out from October 27th, where it said that some school systems, including Culpeper County Public Schools, have embraced the guidelines. Last month, Culpeper officials said the system was already in compliance, requiring staff to use names, pronouns listed on the student's record, and families who want to make changes to submit a request to their school principals, among other rules. Therefore, in terms of the general application of what the administration has proposed, when you already see school systems already adopting even what was then at the time a draft policy without even being a final regard, I would say that there is certainly the criteria has been met for general application.
Thank you, Delegate Rome. Mr. Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Again, I'm Andrew Wheeler, the Director of the Office of Regulatory Management. And I agree, because the model policy is not a regulation or a rule, we do not believe that this committee has any jurisdiction over the policy. However, in deference to the chairman, the governor has asked his team to appear today to discuss the policy. In a minute, I will turn the podium over to Secretary of Education, Amy Gadara. However, her ability to answer some questions may be limited because the administration is still reviewing the public comments, and decisions on potential changes have not yet been made, and on advice of counsel due to the threat of litigation from several parties. Thank you.
We appreciate that, and we're not here to.
Okay, I'm really going to jump off as soon as this, but I have to preface this. Is he actually mentions the threat of litigation in a hearing, pandering to the people threatening to litigate against them. Okay? Now, in a minute, Gadara is going to come in. She's going to get her butt handed to her because she doesn't even know what the law says. She doesn't understand how education policy works. And she absolutely gets squashed by a delegate who thinks that precedent is a bill that failed 5 years ago and can't even argue what precedent is because she has absolutely no idea what she's talking about. So he literally just admitted she's coming in, but she can't say anything because of the threat of litigation. Is that where we are? Is that we are afraid to stand up for the Constitution and the right of parents as a fundamental right with 100 years of Supreme Court? It's a constitutionally God-given right. But because of the threat of litigation, we send somebody in there who only knows how to data mine to argue for parents. So yeah, you can see me sitting here, I'm smug and I'm mad, and then I hadn't even started yelling yet. So yeah, I'm right here, I'm pissed, and it's only going to get worse. But I'm really going to step away now because if not, I'll intervene this whole entire time. But again, I'm going to walk away because this is what's needed for public record.
Litigate anything. We're just trying to figure out why things are the way they are.
I appreciate that. I'm sure it won't come up, but just in the event it does, she may have to defer an answer
Sure.
to a question because of the litigation or the fact that we're still reviewing the public comments. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Secretary Gadara. Good day.
Mr. Chair, good morning. Good morning, members of the committee.
I don't think we have a presentation from you.
No.
Okay.
No, sir. Thank
So
you.
there's nothing in your books, and that's certainly not intentional.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm here this morning to remind everyone that parents matter. Parents are their child's primary educators, best advocates, mentors, and protectors. I am also here to reiterate that there must be zero tolerance for discrimination of any type in our schools. The Virginia Department of Education's 2022 draft model policies, privacy, dignity, and respect for all students and parents in Virginia's public schools reinforces these fundamental values. According to the Code of Virginia, quote, "A parent has a fundamental right to make decisions concerning the upbringing, education, and care of the parent's child," end quote. The Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and the Virginia Constitution also reinforce the rights and interests of a parent to instill in and nurture values and beliefs for their own child and to make decisions concerning their child's education and upbringing in accordance with their customs, their faith, and their family culture. The past 18 months have made it apparent how much parents matter, especially regarding the transparency around what is happening in our schools. There is a wealth of information and research and evidence articulating the positive impact of parental involvement and engagement on all student outcomes, well-being, success in school, and success in life. I can cite Hare and Burke, 1998, Hill and Kraft, 2003, Mark Hahn, 1999, Stevenson and Baker, 1987, just to name a few. In fact, the 2022 model policies cite that the Global Family Research Project, known as the Research Project until 2017, concluded in 2007 that, quote, educators in middle and high schools, as well as practitioners in programs that serve young adults, must acknowledge that families play a critical role in helping youth succeed in high school and beyond, end quote. Along these lines, in a timely way, I just received this past week a notice from President Biden's federal Department of Education about the importance of parents being actively engaged in schools and their children's education as critical partners. The toolkit that the U.S. Department of Education provided and sent out across the country, including to all of our educators here in Virginia, was full of research and a roadmap for schools to keep parents informed about their child's development and education. Parent engagement should not be controversial in education, nor should it be a partisan issue. One of the greatest insights I carry with me to this day from my teaching time in Japanese schools is the core understanding that student success rests on a three-legged stool of students, parents, and teacher engagement and partnership. The Japanese understand that if one leg of this stool is wobbly, the other two must work together to shore up and stabilize that goal of success for that child. This core belief of productive partnership among teachers, students, and parents is critical to the success of our Virginia students as well. And it is also the theory behind our new office of parent engagement, as well as our work to support teacher training and capacity building around developing productive partnerships with parents and students in the quest for improved academic achievement. And yet, despite all of the data and the bipartisan efforts to support informed parent engagement, the 2021 policy undermined core tenets of this important partnership. The former policy disregarded parent rights and actually empowered school divisions to be the determinants of whether to, one, accept a student's request to identify as a different gender, or two, abide by the parent's wishes to continue using the student's legal name and sex assigned at birth, or three, to develop an alternative that respects both the students and the parents. No wonder only 10% of our school divisions adopted this confusing policy. In one case, Fairfax County created training materials which instructed teachers to not communicate with parents about their child's actions around their identity at school unless the student wanted them engaged. As a parent, I cannot imagine a teacher keeping me in the dark when my daughter was going through the most important decision of her life. And if she was, she did not, changing her identity. That is the ultimate sign of arrogance, to presume that a school or a teacher knows better than I do as a mother how to support and how to help my child. This is why parents are up in arms about what is happening in our schools today. If a child is questioning any part of his or her life, including the most life-altering decisions around their identity, parents are in the best position to love, to encourage, to support, and to partner with their child. This includes as they struggle to determine what names, nicknames, and/or pronouns, if any, shall be used by their child, by teachers and school staff while their child is at school, whether their child engages in any counseling or social transition at school that encourages a gender that differs from the child's sex, or whether their child expresses a gender that differs with their child's sex while at school. Yet, the fundamental disrespect of parental rights, the right to be informed, engaged, and the decision maker in their child's education, including questions and actions around identity, as demonstrated by the prior administration's model policies, is why the Youngkin administration is in the process of revising this model policy. The new draft of the model policy puts parents in the decision-making role when it comes to their child's identity. And I must add that in the rare cases in which a child is at risk in their own home, educators are legally required to take actions to protect that child, If these issues of identity are endangering a child in their home life, we have statutorily required processes established to protect that child. The model policy does not eliminate the ability of students to engage in a different gender identity, a different name, or a different dress in a certain way. However, it does bring parents of minor children to the table in these crucial conversations and decisions. While reaffirming parent rights and roles in these matters, it also sets out to protect all children's rights. It prohibits all discrimination, all harassment, all bullying based on national origin, race, religion, sex, disability, political beliefs, or any other characteristic protected by law. It protects student privacy and confidentiality of sensitive information, and it affirms that students may dress in any manner consistent with maintaining a respectful, distraction-free environment regardless of gender. Quoting from the model policy, the draft model policy, quote, "Every effort should be made to ensure that a transgender student wishing to change his or her means of address is treated with respect, compassion, and dignity in the classroom and the school environment," end quote. This new policy also establishes that for any athletic program or activity that is separated by sex, the appropriate participation of students shall be determined by sex. As a mother of 2 daughters who were competitive ski racers in high school, I can't imagine them being forced to compete with athletes whose male bodies, in weight and muscle mass, are able to produce different speeds down the same exact race course because of the law of physics. This isn't about technique and athleticism or hard work. This is about science. All of our daughters deserve a chance to compete in a fair arena. Parents matter. It is not just a slogan, it is a fact, and it is the law. This new model policy is about restoring power to parents. Children do not belong to the state, they belong to families. When a child is wrestling with this kind of decision, a parent should be the primary counselor and help their child. The guidelines under the previous administration disregarded the rights of parents. This administration is committed to seeing every child, treating every child with dignity and respect, and doing everything possible to ensure that every child is prepared for success in life. But we can't do this work without honoring the role of parents as the most important champions and supporters of their child. Parents must be informed, they must be engaged, and they must be active decision makers in their child's life. This policy respects that foundational and legal right of our society. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Section 22.1, 23.3 sets forth the 2020 legislation. Don't you agree that what you're trying to do basically undermines the code section?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. No, not at all. We believe deeply, as I'm looking at it right now on here, and we've studied a great deal as this policy was being put together, is that what we are reinforcing is that all of this, that parents are so fundamental to the well-being of their students and for as research-based and evidence-based, are critical to the long-term success of their child, success in school and their well-being and their health and well-being, that parents must be part of the process. And that's in law, and it's also widely agreed, and the evidence backs it up.
I agree with you. Parents are fundamental. I also agree with the law of child custody. The children's interests have to be the first thing you consider. The child's interests has to be first.
And there, sir, Mr. Chairman, there's also legal cases that say that also that the parents have a right to be involved in that and to balance those needs.
Okay, thank you. There may be other questions. Senator Rabin.
Yeah, thank you. I had a few questions, Mr. Chairman. First off, it's my understanding the 2021 policies were created with evidence-based practices and were crafted with various stakeholders, including transgender youth, parents, and educators. And I was wondering, did the administration consult with transgender youth, parents, and educators before the policies were made?
Mr. Chairman and Senator, yes, we have gotten lots and lots of input. There were over 9,000 comments, as you know, on the former policy. You know that we're hearing now after our draft policy was posted. We're hearing quite a deal from the public. And before this was posted, there were conversations with transgender families of transgender students, yes.
Okay. And if I might follow up, Mr. Chairman, in regard to the parental involvement, if parents want their children to be known by a certain pronoun or name, is that part of your policy that when that happens, that parents' wishes will be respected and carried out?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, yes, that when a parent in writing says that they would like to have their child referred to by a different name or pronoun, that the school system will be responsive to the parent's desires.
Thank you.
Okay. Senator Locke, then Delegate Rome.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, for your presentation. Are there any localities as of this date that have implemented this proposed model policy?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I am not aware of that right now. I don't know if there have been any that have been done. I can get back to you with an answer to that question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That's all I need to know.
Delegate Rome.
Because it is my understanding that there are local school districts that have implemented this model policy that has not been put into place.
Delegate Rome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, first, just if I could make a clarification to the senator. As I stated earlier in the October 27th Washington Post piece, there was, in fact, the quote from Culpeper Schools saying that they are in compliance with the draft version of this policy. So yes, as I was saying before, that there's already general application for this. Second, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have a few questions for the secretary.
Sure. Delegate Rome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I would ask the secretary in this, these are going to be based, the questions I want to ask are going to be based on the text that come from the draft policy itself. The first part on this is that when we passed the original bill, say in the House of Delegates, it was HB 145 from Delegate Simon, as well as the Senate copy from Senator Boysko. Under 22.1-23.3, under paragraph A, on the number 8 line item, at the time of draft, it had included the words athletics. However, in the amended version that ended up passing the General Assembly, it did not. And so that the point at this point, the Code of Virginia states that student participation in sex-specific school activities and events and use of school facilities. Activities and events do not include athletics. Given that the Code of Virginia has explicitly prohibited athletics from being part of this conversation in terms of developing model policies, under what basis is the administration actually including athletics in its original draft and any revision of a draft?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate, thank you for the question. This is one of the issues that we have heard so much out in the field, conversations, comments that people have sent to us. And so as a result, our goal here was to clarify positions and what we believed was the right thing to do. And so we included it in the policy, in the draft policy.
Mr. Chairman, follow-up question.
Delegate Rome.
Considering that when we were dealing with the application of the bill that we passed in 2020 on this in the first place, where you can follow along on lis.virginia.gov, as the administration is very well aware, that with athletics not being included. And in fact, as precedent to that, in 2018, there was a bill, SB 169 from Delegate Stanley, or from Senator Stanley, that came over to the House of Delegates and was defeated on a very wide margin that would have required the VHSL, the Virginia High School League, to have to include a state championship competition for robotics. And at the time, the then Education Committee chairman, who was a Republican member, said that this superseded the state's authority to instruct a nonprofit organization what to do with its membership regulations. So therefore, based on existing precedent from 2018 and based on the Code of Virginia currently as passed in 2020, under what basis could the administration have even introduced this in the first place? And second, under considering that with the introduction of this, that you have had a lot of time from advocates, from VHSL members, from people seeking FOIA requests, all across different lines of government, to the public, to nonprofit work, to anyone who's involved with sports here. How could the administration justify its original draft policy on this, given that precedent established by the Republican majority in 2018 so that they did not have the authority to do this, and based on the Code of Virginia in 2020 explicitly excluding athletics, under what authority could they have come up with this in the first place?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate, as I said, this was something that we were hearing from people a great deal and asking for clarification, and so we put it in this draft policy, and that there are comments that are being reviewed in the moment as well, including on this issue.
All right, Mr. Chairman, follow-up question.
Delegate Rome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the next part that I'd like to review here is that when the Secretary had mentioned before in terms of parental notification and parental involvement, is the Secretary aware that my predecessor in 2017 introduced HB 1612, which specifically stated, quote, the principal of a public school attended by a child shall notify the child's parent, guardian, legal custodian, or other person having control or change of a child within 24 hours of any request by a child to be recognized or treated as the opposite sex, to use a name or pronouns inconsistent with the child's sex, or to use a restroom or changing facility designated for the opposite sex, and that the then 66 to 34 Republican majority rejected that bill with that specific language in 2017.
Mr. Chair, Delegate, I am not sure of the question.
She's just asking if you're aware of Delegate Marshall's bill from 2017 that basically would have done a lot of what your policy is doing.
Everything. Mr. Chair, Delegate, I was not present at that point and am not intimately familiar with all the details, but I will be.
So, Mr. Chairman, then I would ask, Mr. Chairman, I would ask the Secretary in that, given that the Secretary is unaware of existing precedent revolving a Republican bill from 2017 that was shot down in a 6-2 Republican majority in the subcommittee, and that there was no effort to revive this because it was deemed at the time to be too extreme, too controversial. What has fundamentally changed in regard to why the then majority would have put this bill away so that it would not pass, and yet the current administration is adopting exact language that a Republican majority shot down along with the 2 Democratic members of the same subcommittee?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate, just because I said I was not familiar with does not mean that the team that was intimately involved in this was not involved with it and was not aware of it.
Okay, so that, Mr. Chairman, another follow-up question. Mr. Chairman, okay, so we've now established that based on precedent of what you've seen in the Code of Virginia and actions taken by prior Republican majorities here, what you are already seeing that what the administration is attempting to do with its model policy this time around is inconsistent with the actions taken by the General Assembly's former Republican majorities, as well as the Democratic majority in 2020, which, by the way, passed HB 145 with bipartisan support in both chambers. Mind. My next question on this, then, is when you consider that when we adopted the amended version of the Virginia Human Rights Act under HB 149 in 2020, we explicitly included in the Virginia Human Rights Act at the time that we were including sexual orientation and gender identity, including it for non-discrimination and public accommodations, including educational facilities. Given that the draft policies referenced the Grimm versus Gloucester County School Board decision at the federal level, and given that the Code of Virginia under the Virginia Human Rights Act explicitly bans discrimination in public accommodations, including educational facilities, on the basis of gender identity, how is the draft policies that were proposed by this administration consistent with federal and state law in that regard? And if it's not consistent because it simply states that they need to adopt or that they need to abide by Grimm versus Gloucester County School Board in the first place, why on earth would they include this in that model policy if there's no enforcement mechanism for it because it is illegal at the federal and state level?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate, as it says in the policy, everything is in line. We will follow federal and state law.
Well then, Mr. Chairman, question for the Secretary.
Delegate Rome.
Why would you include this? I would ask the Secretary, why would you include that language if you were explicitly acknowledging that it does not follow federal and state law.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate, we believe and we hope that there will be changes in federal law.
Okay, so then, Mr. Chairman,
Delegate Rome.
Mr. Chairman, will the secretary then acknowledge that based on her own testimony, the draft policies are not currently at this time in compliance with federal and state law based on the Virginia Human Rights Act, specifically under the section that I stated earlier regarding public accommodations, as well as under the Grimm versus Gloucester County School Board decision?
Mr. Chair and Delegate, I am not willing to state that. We are in compliance with federal and state law with this policy. And I've also to get into precedent in this conversation, given the threat of potential litigation.
Mr. Chairman, question for Secretary.
Delegate Rome. And of course, I'd remind you that we're not really litigating this issue today. We're just trying to figure out.
Right. So, Mr. Chairman, I want a clarification at this case. At this point, will the Secretary then clarify that by saying that they believe they are in compliance currently with state and federal law, it is only because the bill or the policy as presented is not enforceable, and in fact, based on existing precedent of other school boards rejecting the inclusive policies that were passed in 2021 or in 2020 by the General Assembly and adopted in 2021, that by the administration's own statements and that by the actions of other school boards, they consider the draft policies as well as any updated changes to this to be optional as opposed to dictated by law, again, citing precedent of actions by the school boards as well as statements from the administration.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate, I don't think it's appropriate for me to engage in a debate about the precedent and law.
Mr. Chairman,
Delegate Head.
I would submit that the very nature of the question that was just asked validates my previous point that we have no business talking about this before this committee.
I would say, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Rome.
Mr. Chairman, I would tell the delegate, who I've enjoyed debating on many occasions in the House of Delegates, and I know I'll have another chance to do that this upcoming year, that in this case, considering that you already have actions, as I stated earlier, from Culpeper, among other localities here, that they are actively willing and engaging in the adoption of the draft policy of this, that yes, we do have jurisdiction in JCAR for this because you have school boards that, in this case, when they are saying that they are acting within the authority that the administration is giving them, and they believe that they're acting within the General Assembly's authority, even though our side would certainly disagree on the latter on this, that we do have actual harm being caused, and we do have actual action that needs to be taken regarding these policies explicitly because of the debate that's happening right now in different school boards regarding their actual authority.
But Delegate Rome, we're not really debating in here. We're just trying to gather information. And I appreciate the point
I yield,
of
Mr. Chairman.
everybody and the disagreement. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Are there additional questions of any kind?
Yeah, I have a question.
Delegate Senator Eben.
Well, I have two questions. First, I was wondering, are any of the resources listed in the 2022 model policies specifically for or about transgender and non-binary youth?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I need to go back and look and see, but I believe they're in general in terms of the impact of parent engagement on well-being in general, including for transgender students.
But any specifically for transgender or non-binary youth?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I can go back and look, and can get back to you with that.
Okay, I'll look forward to that. And then I wanted to ask about the timeline right now where we are on the adoption of this policy. What are the next steps and what is the forecasted timeline?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I know there has been incredible amount of public comment on this draft model policy. We are in the process of reviewing those, and that we are doing that with all due course, and we'll be able to respond once we have those done, and it will be posted after we have reviewed those comments, made any appropriate changes and updates to that, and then they'll be posted and become policy.
Okay, and a final question, sir.
Senator,
So do we know if we're talking about weeks or months or any forecast at all on how long this will be?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, we are doing it with as due haste and making sure that we are thoughtfully reviewing comments and providing the time to provide a response that we think also is responsive to people's voices.
Okay. Can I just ask one more? I'm sorry.
Okay, Senator Evans.
Last question. In terms of stakeholders, you mentioned that you consulted with transgender youth before you adopted this policy, and I was wondering what other stakeholders beyond the Department of Education staff were directly consulted or engaged in the creation of these 2022 model policies?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, we have heard from school boards, from parents, from teachers, from voters, from people across the Commonwealth who have great passion about this issue and believe that this is one of the most important things that needs to be clarified in the Commonwealth. And this is one of the issues that we hear from the most in the governor's office.
Thank you.
Okay, Delegate Robinson's got a question, I think.
Yes, I just have, for a point of clarification, I thought model policies were established by the Board of Ed or, for school boards to consider in whether they wanted to be adopted into each locality's, curriculum for what they're doing. And for point of clarification, the fact that Culpeper School Board has chosen to go down a path in alignment with the draft model policy, that's within their purview, correct, as a school board? And
I think Delegate Rome's point was that that's some proof that what this policy is enacted has the force of law or has significant general application potentially across Virginia.
But I thought that was the right conditional question, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
I thought that that's what school boards were supposed to design things around model policy. They didn't necessarily have to accept the model policy in its entirety. And I'm just doing this asking from a point of clarification, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I can answer that question. Mr. Chairman, to respond to the delegate from Chesterfield in this, I will review back to the Code of Virginia. In this case, this would be under 22.1-23.3. This is from the bill that we actually adopted in 2020, where paragraph 3 states that each school board shall adopt policies pursuant to subsection B of 22.1-22.3 of the Code of Virginia as created by this act no later than the beginning of the 2021-2022 school year. Therefore, these policies are, as we adopted as a General Assembly in 2020, are in fact bound by law. And in fact, the governor had stated that he believes that the draft policies that are on the table right now and that are under reconsideration, he said that he expected all 133, 132 school boards across the Commonwealth to also adopt in them themselves. And therefore, even though I disagree with the governor asserting his authority that I do not believe he rightfully is exercising at this, the Code of Virginia makes it explicitly clear that this is a shall and it is not optional for school boards.
For the shall she's talking about is in section 22.1, 23.3, which was the bill that was enacted in 2020. Okay, thank you, Madam Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee.
The other point of view is going to be expressed from a team from the American Civil, please, from the American Civil Liberties Union, Eden Hellman and Jerry Greenspan, and from the Equality Virginia, Narissa Rahman. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. My name is Jerry Greenspan. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a staff attorney with the ACLU of Virginia. Thank you so much for having me here today to discuss the Virginia Department of Education's proposed model policies for transgender students in Virginia's K-12 schools. We have provided some materials, I believe, for your consideration ahead of time. I do not have a PowerPoint today.
We have tons of materials.
Great.
And tons of written comments. Thick binders, each one of us.
Excellent. Thank you again for having me. So let us be clear, both as a matter of law and as a matter of principle, the rights of transgender students in Virginia are not up for debate. Schools may not discriminate against students based on their gender identity. We have an obligation to protect, educate, and nurture all students in our public schools, paying special attention to those who are most vulnerable. And parents may not prohibit schools from fulfilling this mandate. The VDOE's proposed model policies, if adopted, will violate state and federal law and will result in real tangible harm to thousands of trans and non-binary students throughout our Commonwealth. We know that transgender youth experience higher rates of bullying, harassment, and discrimination than their cisgender peers. And we know that when transgender youth have a negative experience at school because of their gender identity, it often has serious life-changing consequences, including greater risk of suicide, other mental health challenges, and worse educational outcomes. But luckily, we also know what works in terms of preventing these harms. Despite all of the available evidence, the VDOE's new proposed model policies will require schools to do the exact opposite of what transgender students need in order to succeed in school. Our friends from Equality Virginia will speak more about these harms that the policies will inflict on students. I am going to focus on how the proposed model policies fail to comply with state and federal law. And they fail to comply with state and federal law in several ways. Number one, they do not comply with the legislative intent of the authorizing statute. Number two, they are not evidence-based as required by the authorizing statute. Number three, they overreach in substance beyond the mandate of the authorizing statute. And number four, they invite and sometimes even require discrimination in violation of federal and state law. Because these model policies do not comply with the authorizing statute and completely ignore that statute's intended purpose, we encourage this commission to file an objection with the VDOE to the proposed model policies. As you know, in 2020, the General Assembly enacted Virginia Code Section 22.1-23.3, which directed the VDOE to promulgate model policies for the treatment of transgender students in Virginia's K-12 schools. Statements made by the bill's sponsors at the time of its passage, Delegate Simon and Senator Boysko, made clear that the purpose of this law was to ensure that transgender students throughout the Commonwealth, regardless of where they lived, were safe and included in school, so that they could fully access and participate in their education and all of the benefits that our schools offer. Shortly thereafter, the VDOE convened a group of multidisciplinary stakeholders, including parents, experts, and directly impacted people with lived experience. And after a series of stakeholder meetings throughout Virginia, developed the original evidence-based model policies that were adopted in 2021. In September of this year, the VDOE published the new proposed model policies barely a year after schools were required to adopt the original model policies. It is clear from the substance of the proposed model policies that the recitation of guiding principles, that the overarching goal of these policies is the protection of students, parents, and teachers who believe that they should be permitted to discriminate against transgender students. The new proposed model policies do not even attempt to serve the purpose of the General Assembly in passing this statute, and in fact, they directly contravene that purpose. This is evident when you compare the language of the statute to the content of the proposed model policies. The statute requires the policies to advise schools on how to maintain, quote, a safe and supportive learning environment free from discrimination and harassment for all students. But the proposed model policies undermine the rights and safety of transgender students in so many ways, and I will just list a few. By, for example, requiring schools, staff, teachers, and counselors to out transgender students to their parents without the student's knowledge or consent. By privileging the desire of other students and teachers to discriminate against transgender students over the rights of those students to be free from such discrimination. By restricting transgender students' access to facilities that align with their gender identity. By prohibiting school counselors from speaking with students about their gender or gender identity without parental consent. By requiring transgender students to provide invasive and burdensome documentation simply to have their school recognize their identity, and by completely erasing and ignoring the existence of non-binary students altogether. These sorts of policies will harm rather than protect transgender students and will create a more hostile and stigmatizing school environment instead of a safe and supportive one, as required by Virginia Code Section 22.1-23.3. Further, the proposed model policies will not facilitate the adoption of uniform policies throughout the Commonwealth. The proposed model policies leave it to individual school districts to determine how to apply the policies to transgender students in order to comply with federal law. The model policies provide no guidance on what federal law requires or prohibits. This will inevitably result in different outcomes for students facing similar circumstances, depending on where they live, and will invite litigation where a school district adopts an unreasonable interpretation of federal law. Thus, the proposed model policies undermine every goal of the authorizing statute, and they also fail to meet the requirements of the authorizing statute. So the statute requires the model policies to reflect evidence-based best practices. This is a key part of the authorizing statute. These proposed policies cite no empirical evidence specific to the needs of transgender students to support the substance of the policies. It is not clear that VDOE consulted any experts on the needs of transgender children during the development of these policies. Teachers, medical providers, and mental health providers all submitted public comments opposing these model policies and describing the ways in which they contravene accepted best practices. This alone should raise alarm bells that the proposed model policies are a statement of ideology and not a reflection of evidence-based decision-making. This is also evident in the proposed model policy's overarching concern with parents' rights. Importantly, the model policies cite no evidence that supports that a focus on parents' rights is the best way for schools to support transgender students specifically. This is because no such evidence exists. All of the available evidence, some of which was provided to you ahead of this meeting, points to the benefits of school policies that affirm students' gender identities, for example, by using their names and pronouns consistent with their gender identity, as well as facilitating their full participation in activities consistent with their gender identity. The evidence also documents the harms that occur when transgender students face discrimination, harassment, or bullying at school. Those harms are serious and include the increased risk of suicide, increased absenteeism from school, and worse educational outcomes. And finally, the evidence unfortunately demonstrates that a majority of transgender children do not have the support of their parents at home, and that those children are at an increased risk of physical abuse, homelessness, and suicide, among other negative outcomes, because their parents do not recognize or support their gender identity. Our friends at Equality Virginia will speak more about the impact of parental rejection on transgender children, but suffice it to say that the evidence is clear that transgender students need the support of trusted adults at school and a school environment that affirms their identity, especially when their parents don't. The authorizing statute is clear that any model policies must take into account this evidence, but the proposed policies completely ignore this reality, and they do not in any way reflect the accepted best practices that flow from this evidence. The proposed model policies exceed the mandate of the authorizing statute in several ways. Nowhere in Code Section 22.1-23.3 do the words parents' rights appear. The statute is not concerned with protecting parents' rights, and it does not authorize the model policies to address parents' rights. The language of the authorizing statute clearly requires the model policies to focus on the needs of transgender students, not the needs or desires of their parents or other students' parents. The authorizing statute also clearly states that the model policies should not address the ability of transgender students to participate in athletics. Nonetheless, the VDOE disregarded the statute and included a model policy that would require school districts to regulate the participation in sex-segregated athletics on the basis of quote-unquote biological sex. The statute does not authorize the model policies to prohibit school districts from fully protecting transgender students. Yet, the proposed model policies would prohibit school districts from using a student's affirming name or pronouns in the absence of a legal name and gender marker change. These elements of the model policies reflect the VDOE's overreach in the service of its ideological goals. This overreach at best invites and at worst requires discrimination against transgender students that violates federal and state law. The U.S. Supreme Court has held that discrimination on the basis of gender identity is discrimination on the basis of sex. The Fourth Circuit's ruling in Grimm versus Gloucester County School Board establishes that a school policy prohibiting transgender students from using the restroom that aligns with their gender identity violates both the Equal Protection Clause of the U.S. Constitution and the requirements of Title IX. The court made clear that there is no basis in fact or evidence for school boards to employ discriminatory bathroom policies like the one included in the proposed model policies. The same can be said of the model policies as a whole. As the Fourth Circuit noted in Grimm, such policies reflect a bias that, quote, gender identity is a choice, and that school policies should privilege sex assigned at birth over students' true gender identity. The proposed model policies are rife with standards that reflect this bias and that stigmatize transgender students through differential treatment, including in name and pronoun usage, access to facilities, and access to school activities. As the Fourth Circuit recognized, this stigmatization of transgender students is inherently harmful to them, and it forms the basis of claims that such policies violate equal protection and Title IX. Virginia's Constitution also contains an equal protection clause in Article 1, Section 11, that explicitly prohibits discrimination based on sex. In addition, Virginia's Human Rights Act explicitly prohibits discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation in places of public accommodation, including educational institutions. And that's Virginia Code Section 2.2-3900 going forward. The VDOE's proposed model policies disregard these prohibitions entirely by requiring schools to discriminate against transgender students in various ways and by failing to acknowledge the requirements of state and federal laws. Those proposed model policies will inevitably result in discrimination that violates state and federal law. The original 2021 model policies were promulgated according to the intent and instructions of the statute. There was no need to revise them. The proposed model policies the VDOE has published this year are exactly what they appear to be. They are a political attack on our most vulnerable students in our public schools. They are contrary to state law and invite and require schools to violate federal law. We again respectfully request that this commission note its objection to the policies and recommend that they be rescinded. And I'm happy to answer any questions that members of the commission have, and then our friends at Equality Virginia have some additional information for the commission.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Greenspan. Are there any questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman?
Delegate Head.
Yeah. Thank you for your testimony today. Two brief questions, Mr. Chairman. First of all, does your organization have any feeling about the rights of parents? And I also would ask in your response to that, I thought I heard you say that there was nothing that addressed the right of parents in code related to this statute, and it just was purely about the rights of the students and in the code section that we're dealing with, that you're concerned with. Could you just, so is there anything about parental rights that you would like to that you would support? I mean, does the ACLU support parental rights?
Mr. Chairman and Delegate, we were here today to talk specifically about these model policies. And with regard to these model policies, the statute that authorizes the Department of Education to promulgate the model policies focuses on the needs of transgender children in public schools. It does not focus on the rights of parents. It does not focus on the desires of parents. Of course, parents are important to children's education, to be involved. However, in this context, as to these model policies, focusing on the rights of parents is an overreach beyond what the department was authorized to do by the statute passed by the General Assembly.
Mr. Chairman, follow up?
Delegate Head.
On that, then how does that statement square Code of Virginia in Title I, 240.1? In a title of that section is Rights of Parent, says a parent has a fundamental right to make decisions concerning the upbringing, education, and care of that parent's child. If that fundamental right exists in code.
Delegate Head, I think the point she's making is that in 22.1, 23.3, which authorizes
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to hear the response to that, though, when I'm asking the question to the witness here, specific to how when those two things are in such stark conflict, and that supersedes this and predates by a long shot the legislation and was not addressed in this code, when we didn't bring that in, but when the fundamental right of parents to make decisions concerning the upbringing, education, and care of the parent's child, how can you say that the rights of those parents cannot be acknowledged in model policy reflecting the upbringing, education, and care of that child?
Mr. Chairman and Delegate, first of all, I don't think the two statutes are in conflict. The General Assembly passed a statute directing the Department of Education to promulgate model policies on a very specific topic. The department then cannot go and promulgate policies on any other topic. So the model policies need to be limited to what was directed by the General Assembly. And of course, parents do have rights. Parents' rights are not absolute in many aspects. There are many places in the code where parents' rights are not absolute and for various reasons may be limited in various circumstances. Discrimination is prohibited in our schools by state and federal law. And schools also have to follow that mandate. And so the model policies proposed by the Department of Education, whether in deference to parents' rights or any other principle, cannot require schools to discriminate against transgender children, which is what they effectively will do if they are adopted as drafted.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Greenspan. Are there additional questions? Delegate Robinson.
I have a question. So at the one of your very first statements was to create an environment that is safe for all students. I think that's what you said. You had an additional word in there. And so what about the student who is not transgender? And I'm not saying discriminate against transgender student. I think all kids should be treated, the same and have these rights. But what about that student who isn't comfortable in the bathroom, in the locker room, in a sporting event where you're putting a male against a female on a wrestling mat? Those are all incidences where those environments, the other student who's not transgender may not feel safe, and yet you characterized your original premise when you started this discussion was a safe environment for all students.
Mr. Chairman, transgender students do not present a risk to their peers. The evidence is clear that, and quite frankly, the implication that transgender students are somehow
That's not my question. I'm not saying that they are, there's any risk involved at all, Mr. Chairman. I apologize, but what I'm saying is, what about the other student who is not transgender, who is not comfortable in those environments?
I'll tell you what, we really are arguing because the code section doesn't address that either. It addresses transgender students.
Mr. Chair, and maybe that's where I am right now. I'm listening to a lot of debate, I think, outside of what this body is empowered to do or discuss. And so I would ask the chair to, again, possibly reiterate what we are here to discuss, consider, and I think that was the governor's policies, and if those policies go beyond what the General Assembly intended for those to be.
And Delegate Bagby, I think that's right. I think we have to look under 30-73.3, whether it's authorized by statute, whether it's complies with legislative intent, whether it will cause a substantial reduction in private sector employment, and contains no mandate that improperly burdens businesses or would impose a significant adverse economic impact on the locality, business, or entity. That's pretty plain. So, Delegate Rome, we're not debating anymore, but I think you have a question.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, specifically state to the delegate from Chesterfield that the Supreme Court of Virginia in 2017 has already ruled on this in terms of establishing existing policies that trans kids in and of themselves being present in a restroom does not cause actual injury. And if you need me to cite the actual opinion itself, I'd be happy to do that. I'll be happy to send out the PDF as well.
Thank you, ma'am.
This is in the case of, it was Antry Lafayette et al. Versus School Board of Fairfax County. The opinion was offered by Senior Justice Leroy Millett Jr. on April 13th, 2017.
Thank you, ma'am. Are there any other questions for Ms. Greenspan? I apologize. And next, we're going to hear from Equality Virginia. And I hope you're not going to be repetitive, tell. Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Rahman.
Yes. There's a password for this? Yeah. I had a feeling. Good afternoon, Commission members. My name is Narissa Rahman. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Executive Director at Equality Virginia.
Good afternoon. My name is Kylie Hines. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Safe Schools Coordinator at Equality Virginia. And before we get started, I just want to present a tidbit of information for the members of the Commission in regard to a question that was asked earlier about school boards who have already adopted the draft 2022 model policies. We have been tracking that information. Pittsylvania County did adopt the draft 22 model policies on October 12th before the public comment period had concluded. I believe it was a unanimous decision among that school board. So just for the Commission's consideration.
Equality Virginia believes that schools should be places of liberation where every student can thrive and reach their full potential. LGBTQ students disproportionately experience school climates that are hostile to their overall well-being and educational attainment. This is especially true for LGBTQ students who are Black, Indigenous, people of color, transgender, non-binary, and students with disabilities. A hostile school climate, much like the one the proposed model policies would create, will affect trans and non-binary students' academic success and mental health. All students in Virginia deserve a K-12 education system that allows them to grow, to learn and grow free from harm, and trans and non-binary students must be afforded the equal opportunity to learn in a safe and affirming school environment. The 2022 model policies do not provide trans and non-binary students this opportunity and would instead create learning environments, again, that are unsafe, hostile, and dangerous. I do think it's important to mention that what we're speaking here today are not hypotheticals, they are not potentials. These are real harms that are already occurring in students, for students, and just the mere proposal of anti-trans policies like the 2022 model policies has devastating effects on the mental health and well-being of trans and non-binary youth. 94% of LGBTQ youth report that recent politics negatively impacted their mental health. LGBTQ young people are not inherently prone to suicide risk because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, but rather they are placed at higher risk because of how they are mistreated and stigmatized in society, including in school. A 2021 peer-reviewed study by the Trevor Project, published in the American Journal of Community Psychology, found that greater occurrences of minority stress experiences are associated with increased odds of attempting suicide. LGBTQ plus youth reported experiencing 4 types of minority stress: LGBTQ-based physical harm, discrimination, housing instability, and change attempts by parents were 12 times at greater odds of attempting suicide compared to youth who experienced none. The graphics that you see on the screen in front of you are actually from a report that the Trevor Project did with data from actually Virginia LGBTQ students. The 2022 model policies would contribute to the exacerbation of these minority stressors and create increasingly unsafe and unproductive learning environments for all students, especially trans students. The model policies will put trans and non-binary students at risk for harm and discrimination, both at home and in school, by restricting restroom access, requiring them to jump through legal hoops just to be referred to by their affirming pronouns, and require faculty and staff to out trans and non-binary students to their parents. All of these practices lead to increased distractions for all students as well as educators. And this is a public comment that was submitted during the public comment period in opposition to the model policies from a public school employee who says, "I know how important it is to have a welcoming and accepting environment for all students. Children should feel safe in school to explore who they are and who they want to be, and these policies would take that away from them. This affects all children. The harm to non-binary and trans students will indirectly impact their peers, and those children will see adults not protecting their friends. This erosion in trust will affect all schools if these policies are enacted."
These stats that you see on this slide as well are from that 2022 Trevor Project report that was just released with the Virginia data. The 2022 model policies would require school personnel to disclose a student's real or perceived transgender status to their parents without the student's knowledge or consent or any consideration for the student's well-being. This would force teachers into the impossible position of risking either their job and their livelihood or the safety and well-being of their students and what they know to be true about how to ensure that for their students. Forcibly outing students erodes trust between students and teachers, and we know that trust between students and teachers has been proven to foster a supportive and equitable educational environment for all students. I would also like to say, a lot of folks will agree that, the parent-child relationship is sacred. I'm a macro social worker. I have a background in child development, and that is 100% true. But I will also say school staff, inserting themselves into a family's dynamic and sharing sensitive information about a student's identity with their parent before the student has a chance to do so themselves, before they have a chance to meet and have that self-disclosure and that honesty within the context of that parent-child relationship, that would cause irreparable damage to that relationship. Not only harm, but it is inappropriate. Research also suggests that among LGBTQ youth, only a third experience parental acceptance, a third experience parental rejection, and a third do not disclose their LGBTQ identity until they are adults, likely because of fear of rejection. And fewer than 1 in 3 transgender and non-binary youth found their home to be gender affirming, and a little more than half found their school to be affirming.
And this is a public comment also submitted. Someone said, "I worked in education for several years, including as an administrative assistant at a very good school in Fairfax County. Throughout my time here, I came to know and help several trans students who would use the bathrooms in the main office or come to the nurse's office while I worked in there. They were all able to go about their schooling with the names they chose as well as their preferred pronouns. And without that, school would have been immensely harder. These kids deserve to have their identities respected where they spend the majority of their time. To be denied their names or identity would create a mental health and bullying crisis in our schools. And so, we know that the model policies that are proposed would require trans and non-binary students to utilize an unnecessary process to be referred to by their affirming name and pronouns. Even if students followed the proposed process, the model policy allow teachers to misgender and dead name these students. Misgendering and dead naming in school is a major fear and concern for transgender and non-binary students. All students have the right to be addressed by name, pronouns, and other terms that correspond with their gender identity. This foundational respect should not rely on whether a student has access to a legal name change or gender marker change on official documents. Educators, staff, and peers should always use a pronoun and name with which a student identifies or requests. Requiring parents to submit in writing that their students be called by the appropriate name and pronouns creates an unnecessary burden on families and puts students at risk. It can create harmful circumstances and threaten the health and safety of trans and non-binary students whose parents are not supportive. And even for students who succeed in updating their name and pronouns, again, the policies still allow educators to misgender and dead name. In a poll conducted by the Morning Consult on behalf of the Trevor Project, when asked about proposed legislation that would require schools to tell the student's parent or guardian if they request to use a different name or pronoun, or if they identify as LGBTQ at school, 45% youth said it made them feel angry. 34% said it made them feel nervous, and nearly 1 in 3 felt stress. Affirming trans and non-binary youth by respecting their pronouns and allowing them to change legal documents is associated with lower risk of attempting suicide. And trans and non-binary youth who reported having pronouns respected by all people they lived with attempted suicide at half the rate of those who did not have their pronouns respected by anyone with whom they lived.
This is an additional quote from someone during the public comment period. They say, "I'm a parent of a transgender male student, and each day I worry for his safety. As a parent and an educator, I believe it is not the responsibility of the educator to out a child because of who they are. Outing a student can lead to being rejected by their parent, which in turn can have detrimental effects and may put these children in danger." The negative school environments and increased student stress that the 2022 model policies would create directly influence transgender and non-binary students' academic success. According to GLSEN's 2021 National School Climate Survey, 74.2% of transgender students reported feeling unsafe at school based on their gender. 72.9% avoided bathrooms at school altogether. And you can imagine the physical health impacts of doing that. 58.6% avoided locker rooms, 51.2% avoided gym and PE class, which has more long-term health implications. 38.3% missed school for safety reasons. Relatedly, 19.7% changed schools for safety reasons, and 53.4% of transgender youth reported being prevented from using their chosen name and pronouns. Some additional statistics from that same survey. LGBTQ students who experience anti-LGBTQ related discrimination at school had lower GPAs on average than their peers, 2.92 on average GPA versus 3.20. They were also more likely to have been disciplined at school, 51.2% versus 26.2%, and had lower self-esteem and school belonging and higher levels of depression. And trans students who face this sort of victimization are 3 times more likely to have missed school in the past month than their peers. And of the LGBTQ students who indicated that they were considering dropping out of school, about half, 51.5%, indicated that they were doing so because of a hostile school climate, including issues with harassment, unsupportive peers or educators, and gendered school policies and practices.
The lives of trans and non-binary youth quite literally depend on access to affirming spaces. Since most youth under age 18 spend the majority of time in school, it is imperative that these environments are supportive of their identities and responsive to their needs. Access to a quality education is impossible if we do not first ensure that the safety and humanity of all students is valued and preserved. Trans and non-binary students are not going anywhere. Their struggles are not hypothetical. They are real, they are current and damaging. But these model policies are also damaging. And trans students are kids just like all other students are, and they deserve to feel as though their needs are equally as important. We encourage swift action from this commission to pose an objection to the model policies.
Thank you, ma'am. Are there any questions? Senator Boyce goes on the line. She wants to, we're going to begin the public comment. She's getting ready to go into a doctor's appointment, and she wanted to have a public comment. I guess, does anybody object to that? She's got a doctor's appointment that I think is getting ready to start right away. And so if she is on the line, we ought to let her speak. If she's not on the line, I can read her testimony later.
I do not see Senator Boyce go on the line.
Okay, well, I will read her testimony at the end of all the public hearing. Well, we're at the same point we were before, except we've got a lot more people that want to speak, both for and against. And so I'd ask you to do 2 minutes, to limit your remarks to 2 minutes. We've had a ton of stuff coming here and
Mr. Chair, I do have a question for you on this. We did hear from two groups here in obvious strong opposition to this. Was there an opportunity given for any group that was in support of the
There was an
policy?
opposition for weeks to try to get somebody from the administration here. And it wasn't until this morning that I found out that Mr. Wheeler would be here with Secretary Gadara.
But as far as any of the parents groups or any groups that might have been in support of this that could have brought testimony, were they afforded the opportunity today?
They can give public comment.
So they were limited to public comment, but not given the affordability of
Right.
the
Well,
opportunity to come?
we tried to get somebody from Secretary Gadara. We tried to get somebody from the administration to come.
That's not really the question, Mr. Chairman. We've had outside groups from the administration, outside groups from the legislature be able to voice vocal and very well thought out and prepared statements that were afforded a large amount of time.
And if
yet
anybody
everybody
wants to
else-
submit something in writing, they can do it.
But they would not be afforded the opportunity to be a part of the official presentation here as was afforded the other folks.
They can make public comment.
So discrimination is fine for the other side. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We're taking public comment right now. I'd ask you to limit your. Shucks. Okay. Okay, I'd ask you to limit your public comments to 2 minutes. The people that are here to speak in favor, I would ask you, is that the list I have here? Okay. Mike Noren.
Good
Yes.
afternoon,
And
Chairman.
you'll be given 30 seconds when your time's.
Good afternoon, members.
Good afternoon.
As a parent, I wholeheartedly support a common sense approach that's being taken right now with this model policy. I respect all students, by the way. Gender, it don't matter to me, but I stand on truth, period. Students are minors. That's one thing that really hasn't been brought up today. Here are my points. I want to have the lead role as a parent in raising my child. Parents must be involved in their education, not the ACLU's recommendations, nor school administrators, teachers, or aides. But we are thankful for the teachers and the aides, but their role is just to teach. And I also want to be, as a dad, I want to have the right, first and foremost, to protect my minor child against those intent, whether those intents are sincere or not. Fathers are commanded in the Bible, Ephesians 6:4, to bring up your children with the discipline and instruction that comes from the Lord. A child's development primarily comes from the parents, who always play a central role in shaping and molding this development. Schools are to teach, and for not to let parents have a voice is a tragedy. Common sense must prevail. And I don't stand for transgenders to be in bathrooms or playing sports if they're not from their birth. I don't stand for that. Thank you.
Please identify yourself by where you live and whether you're with a group or not.
Mr. Chairman, members of this committee, thank you so much. My name is Jeff Mitchell. I'm a lifelong Virginia resident, born and raised, and by God's grace, I will die in the great state of Virginia. So thank you for your time this afternoon. Alexander Solzhenitsyn was a famous Russian dissident, and he spent 8 years of his life in Soviet gulags. And on the day before he was finally released to the West, this author and historian and philosopher released the text of his famous essay, Live Not by Lies. And in that essay, Solzhenitsyn equated lies with ideology. It's the illusion that human nature and society can be reshaped to some predetermined specification. Well, the ACLU this afternoon has mounted a challenge to the 2022 model policies on the basis of such ideology. They make the assumption that gender is a socially constructed concept and then appeal to a handful of problematic studies in order to bolster their preconceived commitments to radical gender ideologies. They argue that the failure to do so will harm the mental health of the transgender students and increase the risk of suicide. But children who truly suffer from rapid onset gender dysphoria usually suffer from a whole host of psychological comorbidities in addition to their gender-related distress. And it's important to note that these mental health problems typically precede the onset of gender-related dysphoria. In other words, these students are already experiencing mental challenges when they begin to question their identities. So therefore, advocate for an affirm or else approach for these students for what is truly a complex spiritual and a mental health issue is irresponsible at best, and it's positively harmful at worst. And so to push this narrative on this destructive ideology, a few self-evident truths I think need to be restated. First of all, it's simply not true that a biological male can become a female in any sense of the word. The same can be said.
That's 2 minutes.
I apologize, but the other members had 3 minutes, sir.
They had 2 minutes.
They had yes, but
On the other issue,
on the
they had
last
3
section,
minutes.
it was 3 minutes.
But now we have more people, so we cut it to 2 minutes.
All right.
Do you have your statement in writing?
I do, sir, and I can forward. I don't have a hard copy of it, but I would be happy to.
If you can forward that to us, I'd appreciate that. We'll
right.
make it part of the record.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time this
Thank you.
afternoon.
Ellen Hardy.
I'm here in support of the changes in the transgender regulations that have been proposed. I have 5 granddaughters in Virginia schools, and I previously served on the Henrico County School Board. I considered commenting on this earlier, but saw page after page of anonymous opposition remarks and felt that a personal appearance make a more effective statement. I also know from previously serving as an elected official that those who seek special or extraordinary privileges are more likely to assert themselves than the majority of citizens who remain the silent majority. Please don't assume by my obvious age that I'm unaware of some people's desire to function differently than their biological sex. My 49-year-old daughter's class at Freeman High School had a lesbian and a gay selected by their classmates as king and queen of their prom. I've heard again and again that these children who have different viewpoints from other sides are hurt. I don't think that's happening as much as they like to say. So what I'm saying is these transgender issues are not new, and we don't need to give privileges to this small minority. My concerns are the prior regulations, that the prior regulations mandated that a child's transgender request be withheld or disguised in communication with the child's parents, and that school employees or students face mandates that don't protect their deeply held religious beliefs. And it makes it possible for school children to be exposed to situations where they feel unsafe or exposed, to be viewed in locker rooms by members of the opposite sex. Please support these new revised policies so Virginia educators won't be in a position as they were in other school systems. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And I apologize, this next name, Todd Grathgy?
Verify for you. Great. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I am Dr. Todd Gackey, Director of Government Relations for the Family Foundation. This morning, I would like to convey our support for the VDOE's revised model policies. Gender ideology is being pushed onto students by schools and counselors. It's being used as a wedge between parents and their children. Consider this public comment on these revised policies by a middle school teacher who said they should be able to have a safe environment to be able to explore, and if they don't have it at home, then it's my job to provide that safety in the classroom. The chair of the National Association of School Psychologists and a counselor at a high school in Arlington said this: these kids have to make a choice between their life and their family. And I do not deny the fact that I have put parents in their place in my office or at school. Dr. Jay Green, a Harvard-trained researcher, states in his recent study, Puberty Blockers, Cross-Sex Hormones and Youth Suicide, which evaluates youth suicide between 1999 and 2020, that increasing minors' access to cross-sex interventions is associated with a significant increase in adolescent suicide rates, and that lowering legal barriers to make it easier for minors to undergo cross-sex medical interventions without parental consent does not reduce suicide rates. In fact, it likely leads to higher rates. But there's a dangerous theme developing in Virginia that parents' interests don't matter. This is evidenced by legislation here in Virginia that prohibits parents from accessing licensed counselors to help their children deal with gender confusion. School policies that allow teachers and administrators to promote gender ideology and purposefully hiding information from parents. And then, of course, we've also heard about legislation potentially being introduced that would criminalize parents for not affirming their child's identity. We've heard from the Secretary of Education all of the legal and statutory as well as court case precedents there. I would just like to say and end with, therefore, the department's revised model policies comply with current state and federal law and follow court rulings, recognizing the fundamental rights of parents to direct the education and upbringing of their child.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gackey. Jeff Hoffman.
Mr. Chair. If I could, I actually have an answer for State Senator Locke before I start my time on an earlier question.
Please, we've got a bunch of people still to go.
Okay, I have spoken with the superintendent in Fairfax County where I reside from, and I have proposed Virginia Code, I guess 1-240 language be added to future handbook and regulations regarding the treatment of transgender students. And as a result, I'm also on the group that is developing the strategy, community engagement group, and they've advised me that it is under consideration in Fairfax County. Mr. Chair, distinguished committee members, thank you for having me. We are frustrated as parents to have to come down here to Richmond because we feel our public schools can't be trusted anymore to teach and educate. From the words of Horace Mann, an American public school pioneer who quoted, "Education is our political safety, Public education is the cornerstone of our community and our democracy. We can all agree now more than ever, quality public education is the key to equal opportunity and upward mobility in America, across Virginia and in Fairfax County. I know many wish these words could be preserved, to include organizations like the American Federation of Teachers, who not too many years ago endorsed candidates who truly believed in principled discipline and moderate valued common sense classrooms. I travel a bit for my professional work. As I'm passing through Europe, my passport reminded me of one document that still preserves the heart and soul of America. It includes a quote like Martin Luther King Jr. stating, "We have a great dream." It started way back in 1776, along with images reflective of our great nation, such as the colors of flag that matters in classrooms, red, white, and blue, not influenced by political agendas such as the transgender expansion of minors. I strongly support and applaud Governor Glenn Youngkin's model policy on privacy, dignity, and respect for all students and parents in Virginia's public schools. Firstmost, there is Virginia Code for Parental Rights that was clearly ignored in Senate Bill 161 that mandated requirements for the treatment of transgender students and policies. This must be changed, and parents must be recognized with first rights to our kids. Governor Youngkin's model policy firmly puts forward parent rights as a guiding principle. While my faith guides me to believe in either a biological boy or girl, regardless of political party affiliation, I'm confident we haven't lost touch with what matters to all of us: the well-being of our families and freedom of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In closing, I, along with hundreds of parents in Fairfax County, encourage your recommended support of policy that will get rid of gender identity politics in our school and instead allow focus on better priorities that aim to renew world-class education for Virginia.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your time today, and happy holidays to all of you.
Josh Hetzler is the next speaker. Josh Hetzler. Ann Tatus. Ann Tatus.
My name is Ann Tatus. I'm the Vice President and co-founder of Virginians for Children First. First, you can look up the World Professional Association for Transgender Health or the U.S. Professional Association for Transgender Health, where Dr. Laura Leeper said that 99% of the time the removal of parents from this conversation is a bad idea, and it almost never turns out well. So there are other people that don't have a political agenda that have actually gone through transitioning and are responsible adults who have opinions on this, who I've spoken with. Dr. Erica Garden, look her up, or you're more than welcome. It's not hard to find me. So first of all, I'm in Chesterfield County, the division that nobody talks about, with 63,000 children who had this policy adopted. Delegate Robinson, you should pay attention. Verbatim, okay? Verbatim, this is what a student support plan with the elimination of parents looks like. Asking a child, it will not be kept, or I'm sorry, as a student request, school personnel should work together with the student to develop a plan that meets the student's needs. And then it goes on to say, are the parents aware? Are they affirming? Do the parents participate? Okay, if not, who are your supportive adults? I didn't have 4 miscarriages and give birth to a stillborn son and have a miracle 5-year-old for you to determine on your whim that you think that just because 1 or 2 parents might be bad parents or might not support their children, that all of a sudden you think that I'm not going to be? That's not what parenting is. Yeah, you can put your 30-second sign down. In what sense is it defensible to hold that children are competent to make life-changing decisions that are irreversible, the consequences of which will be with them for the rest of their lives, in which case might not be necessary at all and simply reflect a lifestyle choice which in itself might be a passing fad? What children need is guidance, support, and protection. This should come from primarily their parents and also those in loco parentis. That is
2 minutes.
You don't get to take the rights without the responsibilities. You want to be the parent, then you take everything that comes along with it. You don't send them home with their problems. You don't get to be the parent. You didn't give birth to them. And this is the reason why we need term limitations.
Thank you, ma'am. Will Estrada. Estiada, I apologize.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a privilege to be here to speak with all of you today. My name is Will Estrada. I'm a 19-year resident of Loudoun County, and I'm also the president of Parental Rights Foundation. I speak today in support of this proposed model policy on the privacy, dignity, and respect for all students and parents in Virginia public schools. I think it's important to remember that this proposed policy does not keep a single student from being themselves. It doesn't prohibit any teaching, books, classroom discussions, conversations with counselors. It does only one thing. It ensures that parents are not cut out of the relationship between their children, that when kids walk through that classroom door, that their parents are not cut out of the equation. This proposed policy relies on 1-240.1, Virginia's fundamental parental rights statute, which our organization was proud to work with in 2013. This was a bipartisan piece of legislation. Some of the members who voted for it were former Senator Mark Herring, our former Attorney General, former Senator Charles Colgan, Senator Chap Peterson, and Senator Philip Puckett. And it says simply that a parent has a fundamental right to make decisions concerning the upbringing, education, and care of a child. That's what this is about. Parents, not government employees, are a child's first, best, and most loving guide. 100 years ago, in 1923, the U.S. Supreme Court said in Meyer versus Nebraska that parental rights are a fundamental right. And 2 years after that, the U.S. Supreme Court said in Pierce versus Society of Sisters, the child is not the mere creature of the state. Those who nurture him and direct his destiny have the right, coupled with the high duty, to recognize and prepare him for additional obligations. When we cut parents out of the equation, tragedies like what happened with Abby Martinez's daughter, Yaley Martinez, happens. You can Google it. It's a heartbreaking story. I urge you to support this proposed model policy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Tom Intorcio.
Senator, my name is Tom Intorcio, and I'm with the Virginia Catholic Conference. And thank you for the opportunity to present to the commission. Thank you, members. The same principles that led the Virginia Catholic Conference to oppose the 2020 legislation and the 2021 model policies lead us to affirm and strongly support the essential reforms made in the new policy. We commend the governor and the Department of Education for issuing the new model policies because they uphold parents' God-given and constitutional right to guide their child's development. The new policies honor the sacred role of parents in the care of their children to include school, athletics, and other activities. They also align with the Virginia's presumption of parental autonomy that protects every parent's right to make decisions concerning the upbringing, education, and care of his or her child. Parents know their children's needs better than anyone. If children find themselves struggling with gender dysphoria, they need the guidance and emotional support from parents. The new model policies make clear that school officials must keep parents fully informed and require schools to enforce existing laws, regulations, and student policies to prohibit and deter bullying or harassment. Among the many positive reforms, we are especially pleased that the new policies provide are that no student shall be required to participate in any counseling program to which the student's parents object. Parents must be informed and given an opportunity to object before counseling services pertaining to gender are given. No policy guidance, training, or other written material issued by the school division may encourage or instruct teachers to conceal material information about a student from the student's parent, including information related to gender. In sum, we believe that the new policies restore the role of parents in education while reaffirming the bodily privacy, dignity, and respect for all students necessary to achieve a safe learning environment. They also protect the fundamental liberties of fundamental religious liberty interests of personnel and students. Accordingly, we support the policies. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Sarah Vaya.
So I appreciate being able to be here. I'm from current Senate District 4. What is very disappointing is I've been here for 5 hours for a 3-minute comment, which has now been down to 2 minutes. But I will say these few things. I'm disgusted at the arrogance of this board, at the General Assembly that passed the initial authoritative statute, which y'all didn't follow y'all's own statute. Y'all delegated this to the VDOE, and the VDOE didn't follow the proper policy procedures. Therefore, there was a lawsuit from me, and it made those 2020 model policies a guideline. So let the VDOE go through the current process of this draft policies and do it properly, what y'all failed to do the first time. We wouldn't be here, y'all wouldn't be hearing any of this if the process had been followed legally the very first time. I cannot even tell you the thousands of dollars and pain this has caused my family personally and my county. Threats, death threats, of course, all the time. No longer allowed to be on social media unless I want to read them every day. But I will tell you this, the girls in my county who have been forced to unchange and undress in front of a biological male because a 12-year-old biological male thinks that that's okay, and the biological men that are the school administrators and teachers in charge of the students, that is not okay. My daughter has a right to decide when a biological male sees her body. Period. End of discussion. That's her right. And it's ridiculous that I'm here having to say that out loud. It's common sense that she should make that choice and not a 12-year-old boy who's having some problems. Yes, please seek and get the right counseling, and everyone should be very pleasant and nice to everyone. But my daughter should not have to undress when she does not want to in front of a biological male. And I appreciate this time. It's been 5 hours, it's been a day, and good luck to you.
Thank you. Laura Hanford.
As a parent of a Fairfax County, as a parent in the Fairfax public school system, I fully support the Yankin guidelines. The Northam guidance puts schools in the position of severing the parent-child relationship and of deciding what is best for a child and of unduly influencing that child. While supportive schools are essential and the rights of every student are equally important, parents know, love, and care for their children far more than schools, which are transient in a child's life. The previous guidance went far beyond state and federal law in wresting decision-making and authority away from parents and handing it over to schools. The Yankin guidance appropriately revokes the deceit authorized by the Northam guidance, which in practice directed schools to conceal its interactions with a minor child, whether over counseling or use of pronouns, facilities, etc. This deceitful aspect was one of its most problematic and dangerous features. Dr. Erica Anderson is the former head of the World Professional Association of Transgender Healthcare Professionals. She is crystal clear that it is bad for schools to conceal transition and questions of gender affirmation from parents. There's also growing evidence internationally and nationally of harm from rushing children to gender transition. The previous guidance fostered this unbalanced approach by its complete omission of full research. Most people don't know that the positions on gender care that are crafted by the American Association of Pediatrics are not voted on by its tens of thousands of members, but dictated by a small policy group that has successfully blocked member calls for systematic reviews. Every country that has conducted a systematic review, England, France, Sweden, Finland, have all backed away from the gender only because of the evidence of harm. But the Northam policies pushed this affirming model straight into schools and straight into the gender industry pipeline, which incidentally is a billion-dollar industry.
That's 2 minutes.
So to close, the Yankin policy is common sense and revokes the excesses of the Northam guidance.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Shelley Arnold.
Hi, my name is Shelley Arnoldi, and I'm here representing Moms for Liberty for Fairfax County chapter. I'm a mother of teenagers who have been indoctrinated by the public school system, and I only recognized it when the schools were closed in 2020. I moved to Northern Virginia in 2010 when my daughters were 3 and 5, and I chose a neighborhood in Fairfax County where It had an excellent reputation for its public schools. As a full-time working mother, I put blind faith in my school system, and I assumed our elected officials would do what's right and protect our kids. I've recently learned now how the family life education changes have taken place over the years, and to be honest, it's shocking. Prior to moving here, I spent my professional career living overseas. My ex-husband and the father of my two daughters is an immigrant and non-English speaker. My eldest daughter's best friend from kindergarten to 7th grade has two mothers, and they're good family friends, and both of my daughters have two children who are identified as transgender in their small circle. So I am neither sheltered nor insensitive to the cultures or ways of living. These friends who changed their genders did it with the permission and the support of their parents. Whatever the long-term physical and mental health implications result from their choices, they will have parents who love them to help them through it. Parents love their children unconditionally. Schools are not there to do that. So the Virginia SOL scores, reading and math, are frankly an embarrassment. And the idea that we're sitting here fighting over gender ideology and the rights of our parents to make decisions for their children is somewhat ridiculous. Our schools need to focus on academics, athletics, and club activities and step out of the mental health and brainwashing business. Please support these new policies and respect parents in your communities. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Logan Spina?
I have some copies here since I'm going to truncate to get under 2 minutes. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, my name is Logan Spina. I'm an attorney with Alliance Defending Freedom in Lansdowne, Virginia. 2 brief points in support of the policies. The first is that consistent treatment based on sex is not discrimination based on gender identity. The main assault on policies like the 22 model policies is the claim that it requires discrimination based on gender identity. This is contrary to Virginia law. Firstly, our Commonwealth's Constitution provides, and I quote, "Mere separation of the sexes shall not be considered discrimination." And it's also consistent with the basic logic of what discrimination is. The test for discrimination is whether or not selecting a particular characteristic changes the way that somebody is treated. The policies do not ever cause a person's gender identity to change the way that person is treated. For example, on the issue of pronouns, the fact that a school will not, without parental involvement, participate and facilitate the social transition of a child does not amount to discrimination based on gender identity, because the schools would not use pronouns inconsistent with sex for a cisgendered student as well. For example, suppose a male student comes to a teacher and says, "I'm male, I identify as male, but I want you to use she, her pronouns for me just out of solidarity with my transgender classmates." That request would be denied as well, and the gender identity of the student never changes the outcome. So there is no discrimination based on gender identity. Second, the 22 model policies accommodate the interests of everyone. Our Constitution guarantees the right to freedom, not just as to individual or passing matters, but things that go to the heart of the existing order. In this instance, the model policies choose accommodation over coercion. Students can identify as they wish, but schools will not actively facilitate the social transition without the involvement of the parents. All of this basically facilitates the interests of students, it respects parents, it protects teachers, and it preserves the school's role of educating children and fitting them for citizenship in a free society. Thank you.
Virginia Gentles.
My name's Jenny Gentles. I'm the director of the Education Freedom Center at Independent Women's Forum. I'm also the parent of 2 former Arlington Public School students. We left the Arlington Public Schools, like many parents, during the extended COVID era closures. The districts never asked us why we left, and they never asked what they'd need to do for us to return. But if they did, we would let them know that we no longer trust the public schools to educate our children. Unfortunately, public schools in my area are focused on indoctrination rather than academics, and the March 2021 policies are clear examples. They spell that agenda out very clearly. They require teachers to address children by their ever-shifting array of pronouns. They abolished sex-specific facilities and even choirs organized by sex. And they encourage schools to develop action plans to support students' transition and to consider reporting parents who affirm their child's sex to Child Protective Services. So obviously we needed these revised policies, the 2022 model policies, which protect children from government employees who want to encourage young women to medicalize their insecurities. And they also require school staff to deceive parents. That needed to stop. Pressuring children to choose a new gender identity and then to go down a path of medicalization is cruel and it's manipulative. The children caught up in the social contagion of gender ideology often have underlying conditions like ADHD and autism, depression, anxiety. They have backgrounds of self-harm and eating disorders. And puberty is particularly hard for these highly sensitive and emotionally intense young people. So they're seeking relief in a trans identity. But these girls need their parents' protection during puberty. And unfortunately, the 2021 model policies intentionally drove a wedge between parents and children. The medical transitions that these kids go through put them at great physical risk, and school staff and bureaucrats who are eager to oppose the 2022 policies should acknowledge the irreversible damage that occurs when these children go through transitions, including negative impacts on bone density, cognitive development, cardiovascular health, fertility, and sexual function. There's great harm to students if these policies continue. The 2022 policies protect children from this harm.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Okay, that's the list of people who signed up to speak in favor of the rule, but the people that are going to speak against, you'll get 2 minutes each as well. First one is Brianna Diaz. And of course, we have a virtual world too that'll come after this.
Yeah, thank you, and I think it's a good afternoon now, Commission. Thank you so much for your time. My name is Brianna Diaz. My pronouns are she and they, and I live in Richmond, Virginia, and I'm here today in my personal capacity. I just want to re-uplift the arguments that were made by the ACLU of Virginia, calling into question the legality of the proposed model policies. They uplifted phenomenal points, questioning the intent and purpose of the proposed model policies as inconsistent with the authorizing statute, as well as Equality Virginia's presentation on the impact this proposed model policy would have on transgender and non-binary students. I also just wanted to speak today on my personal behalf as a queer and trans person myself. I came out, hate to date myself, but 20 years ago when I was 13 years old in a small public school in Dallas, Texas. And what I can say what drove a wedge between me and my family was my forced outing. Unfortunately, I have been a victim of that practice where I had somebody call my parents who I was not ready to fully come out to and share who I was. And that led an already difficult home environment to be even harder to be in. It led to much emotional and mental distress. It led to me almost dropping out of high school. It led to so much strife that I and many of my peers did not have to experience at such a young age if I had a school facility that was able to be guided by model policies like the 2021 model policies that would have instructed teachers and provided them with resources to facilitate a collaborative relationship with my family, my parents, to ensure that they were ready to know who I was and to make sure that I was supported and affirmed and not have to go through a life I wish on no young person. I think today we need to be reminded that young people know who they are. They have the agency and determination to be brave and firm and confident in who they are, and we should trust them with that. And so with that very personal story, I just want to make the ask again that this commission object to the 2022 proposed model policies. All we know is that they will drive a further wedge between families and students. It will make the education environment unsafe for all students, including transgender children. We need to make sure that children can be children. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, Carol Shaw.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. I've spoken before you before on many other issues. I happen to be one of the plaintiffs in Virginia's marriage equality case. Today, I'm speaking to you as a parent. My daughter is here with me today. And I'm also speaking with you as a professional. I am a PhD in education at Virginia Commonwealth University, as well as a school psychologist. So that parent professional role is very present for me today. Transgender youth, 73% report physical, psychological, and sexual abuse in their homes. Compared to their cisgender peers, they have a 2-time higher rate of psychological, sexual, and physical abuse in their homes. The purpose of the model policies and the purpose of the original statute was to address a mental health crisis among transgender youth. Literally, these children are dying. Suicide happens nearly 3 times higher in transgendered persons than the general population. Depression, suicidality, attempts of suicide, all of these happen at much higher rates. Statistics quoted earlier about other disorders that are present in these youth are not accurate when we look at the psychological and medical literature coming from the Journal of Pediatrics, the Journal of the American Medical Association. These children are at great risk. This body attempted to provide guidance to schools around a mental health crisis for these children. We don't want to, quote unquote, genderize other children. We want these children to survive to adulthood. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ashley LaFemme.
Good afternoon, members of the Joint Commission. Beneath your binders, you'll see a physical copy of the full letter that I'll be reading. But my name is Ashley LaFemme. I am a second-year medical student at the VCU School of Medicine, and I'm here to read a letter of opposition which has been signed by 936 healthcare professionals in the community and every medical institution in every academic medical institution in Virginia. So we, the undersigned, are healthcare professionals who take care of Virginia's children and families, dedicating our lives to serving you and your children in your greatest moments of need. Rooted in our tenets of healing, beneficence, and self-determination, we are called to advocate for the transgender and gender diverse youth for whom we care, who will be irreparably harmed if the proposed 2022 model policies come into fruition. Affirming a child's gender identity is crucial to the child's health and well-being. We know the statistics. In 2021, over half of all transgender and gender diverse youth considered killing themselves, and 1 in 5 attempted suicide. But for us, these statistics are more than numbers. They are the names and faces and memories of children that we've met and cared for. And in their moments of hopelessness, we find hope together, knowing that when a child's identity and pronouns are honored, their suicidality lessens. Unfortunately, the aforementioned proposed school policy enacts dangerous barriers to the safety of transgender and gender diverse children. This policy claims that all students have the right to attend school in an environment free from discrimination, harassment, or bullying, yet it persecutes children by denying them their identity. Any policy that directs teachers and staff to mistreat their students in this way is discriminatory at best and deadly at worst. As Virginia's healthcare workers, we are the ones who see children in the emergency departments when they decide their lives aren't worth living anymore, when the trauma in their bodies manifests as seizures or psychosis or debilitating pain. We are the ones who listen to these children weep as we try to convince them that their future is bright and real, that the bullying will one day be in the past and the acceptance of who they are will come.
That's 2 minutes.
We've got the letter.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Stephanie Wirt.
Good afternoon. I'm from Chesterfield County. My name's Stephanie Wirt, and I have been a teacher in a public high school here in rural Virginia for 24 years. And I'm a very proud parent of a transgender student who went through Powhatan County Public Schools. I'm here to tell you that adopting this policy, allowing it to continue, would do great harm to all of our children. I've seen the damage done to kids whose parents don't support them. It is my duty as a teacher to support and educate the students in my classroom, to respect them as individuals. This policy limits that. This policy prohibits teachers and school personnel from doing our jobs of preparing students to be productive members of society. Students can't learn if they don't feel safe in school, and this policy is detrimental to the education of Virginia's children. Model policies should create a safe environment for all students to thrive. This policy doesn't do it. Model policies should uphold the dignity of the students in Virginia. This policy doesn't do it. This new policy ties the hands of teachers and school administrators to help our children. Not all kids have supportive families at home that will affirm their identity. Not all kids are safe, but all kids deserve to be safe at school, to have someone looking out for them there as well. Someone to tell them that they are worthy, acknowledge their existence, and support them in their own growth. Model policies should be evidence-based. This new policy takes out vital background information and resources related to issues that the policy addresses. The 21 policies created with input from 34 different stakeholders, including teachers, students, administrators, parents, medical experts such as pediatricians and child psychiatrists. No stakeholders have been identified in this new policy. The new proposed policy was written without consulting experts.
Thank you, ma'am. If anybody gets cut off, they can certainly submit their remarks in writing. Dr. Lori Ann Stritch.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Lori Ann Stretch. I am an LPC, licensed professional counselor, licensed clinical mental health counselor, supervisor, national certified counselor, approved clinical supervisor, and board certified telemental health counselor. And I'm also the proud parent ally of 2 non-binary children. You want to know about economic impact? I had to drive my older child 47 miles to school so that they could be safe. When they first entered that safe school, they were well underweight. They were not meeting their height. Once they attended an inclusive and safe school, they gained 40 pounds and grew 6 inches in 8 months. That is the real effect of being safe. It matters that children have a single adult in their life that is affirming and that provides an inclusive environment for them. It matters that our schools are a place where they can be safe. It matters that they matter. It matters that we're going to honor their gender. We're going to honor their pronouns. We're going to honor that space that they exist. We're going to tell them that they matter and that they're going to be an important part of this society. And the only way we're going to do that is if we start with our schools, because unfortunately, most kids that start this process don't know how to communicate to their parents. 56% of my current client population are adults who were traumatized by the fact that their parents rejected them when they started this journey. 56%. If I told you that 56% of a school was going to be committing suicide because they were rejected, you'd probably do something about that. These numbers are real. These are real people. These are real families. These are real individuals, and this is life and death. Please take this seriously. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Morgan Meadows.
Good afternoon. My name is Morgan Meadows. This is my 8th year as a school counselor in Henrico County Public Schools. I'm also a doctoral student at VCU, obtaining my PhD in counselor education and supervision. My research focuses specifically on the experiences of LGBTQ students and how educators can effectively support them. Delegate Bagmeet is my delegate, and I appreciate all of you taking time and attention to listen to this today. I want to talk specifically about an important component of how these model policies are actually going to impact school accreditation. Specifically for high schools, accreditation is based on several categories, including graduation and completion index, dropout rate, and chronic absenteeism. The new model policies will directly and negatively impact LGBTQ students' ability to meet these criteria and therefore impact their school's accreditation. Transgender youth in particular are 6 times more likely to miss school, while 1/3 of surveyed LGBTQ students missed at least a day of school in the last month, all because they felt unsafe. Creating more reasons for students to feel unsafe at school by allowing teachers to misgender and misname them will only exacerbate school avoidance and increase absenteeism. LGBTQ students who reported they were considering dropping out of school cited 2 significant issues as their reasoning: academic issues and hostile school climate, including issues with harassment, unsupportive peers or educators, and gendered school policies and practices. When a student comes to my office and says they want to get their GED because they can't stand being in school as a transgender student anymore, I do what is best for them. But a GED does not count as a full graduation point, and a school environment that is so unsafe that they'd rather get their GED rather than stay long enough to graduate perpetuates lower scores on the graduation and completion index. These policies harm students. Parents already have a choice to accept and love their children for who they are or not to do so. When parents choose not to do so, their involvement no longer has the positive outcomes that the secretary referenced earlier. It is my job to support students, and I do so by answering the question, what is in the best interest of my students?
2 minutes.
Adhering to these policies is not in the best interest of my students.
Thank you, ma'am. And FOM. Okay, and I would, everyone here who feels like they've been cut off, our staff, Holly Trice's email is on the agenda. You can forward your comments to her. Ms. Pham?
Hi, hello members of the committee. My name is Anne. I live in Richmond, and I'm a parent and a pediatrician. I'm one of the many lucky medical providers who work with transgender and gender diverse youth. The care that I provide goes far beyond medical care. In my clinic rooms, I bear witness to experiences across the spectrum: grief and fear, a parent calling me because their child is in the emergency department with thoughts of self-harm after the school denied their child the ability to play on the sports team of their gender. Pure joy and pride. A patient so excited to tell me that they were casted in their first choice role in their school musical, something that they could have never known as reality if their school did not accept and celebrate their identity. Discussions on transgender and gender diverse youth is often skewed towards risk, self-harm, thoughts of suicide, completion of suicide. Yes, unfortunately, I see this. But what we don't talk about enough is that youth thrive when they're supported at home and at school. Many of my patients, despite the constant stigma, experience happiness and spend their time focusing on normal things, like whether they're going to pass their AP exams, or what anime show they're going to watch after school. Our job as medical providers, mental health providers, and educators is not only to keep children safe, but to help each and every child thrive as their authentic selves. And to do that, we need to trust children and their own journey. That is how we give children respect and dignity. These model policies are going to directly harm an already marginalized youth population who deserve happiness and joy, just like all other youth. I oppose the draft policy and hope the administration looks at peer-reviewed research that provides evidence for supporting trans and gender diverse youth at schools, and also take the time to really listen to stories of all youth to create inclusive model policies. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Greg Anderson.
Good afternoon, Chair Deeds and members of the committee. Thank you for being here today. I'm Greg Anderson. I'm from Falls Church in Northern Virginia. And I'm a former school board member, but most importantly, I'm a parent. And I'm here to urge you to object formally to these policies. Others have made legal arguments, and a few of us have talked about impacts, and I'm going to do that too, but I'm going to put it very simply. The draft model policies will harm children that you have a duty and the power to protect. Thousands of Virginians, including my child, are transgender or non-binary. Our child came out to us in high school, and we reassured them that we loved them, but they knew that, and that we supported them. And they knew that too. They weren't surprised, and they knew they were safe with us. And while most children do have loving parents and safe homes, far too many children do not. Over 1.3 million children suffered abuse nationwide in 2019, 78% of the time by their parents. As horrible as that is, transgender youth are nearly twice as likely to suffer psychological abuse as their cisgender peers. In 2019, 6% of heterosexual high school students surveyed nationally reported suicide in the previous year. As terrifying as that is, and it's terrifying, for lesbian, gay, or bisexual students, it's 24%. And it gets worse. 56% of transgender youth surveyed had attempted suicide. The draft policies will harm children. More students will feel they have no place they belong. More will be abused by those who should care for them. And more will harm themselves or worse. And I want to say something that somebody else said earlier. These are actual, real harms to actual, real people.
That's 2 minutes.
Reject these policies, please, and protect these children.
Okay, thank you, sir. David Gorman.
Good afternoon, members of the commission. My name is David Gorman, and I'm a resident of Richmond City, and I work as a middle school counselor here in Virginia. I'm here to express my opposition to the 2022 draft model policies. Several of my students that I support identify as transgender. As a school counselor, I have seen firsthand how my transgender students thrive when their chosen names and pronouns are respected by school staff. For any student to learn, they must first feel safe. And my transgender students feel safe when they know their teachers and counselors accept them as they are. Unfortunately, the proposed policies endanger this sense of safety. The proposed policies will harm the mental health of my transgender students. Research shows that this type of policy, where chosen names and pronouns are not respected, would increase transgender students' risk of suicide, as we've heard today. The job of schools is to love and support students, to foster their growth, to give them the space to figure out and be who they are, not to discriminate against them or to harm them. As a school counselor, I urge you to reject the proposed policy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Alan Daniel.
Good afternoon. I'm Alan Daniel, and I'm from Orange County, Virginia. I'm coming to you today as a parent, and I wanted to talk to you about these, the 2022 policies, and that I would like y'all to reject these. I want to ask, what is the role of schools? Is the role of school to rat out students to the parents? I don't think it really is. I think that the school needs to focus on teaching and not to out transgender students to their parents. And why would a parent need someone to tell you about your kid? Why would, you shouldn't have to have the school tell you, if you're doing your job as a parent, you should be able to know your own child. So I don't understand the comments of that, the school needing to tell them. And also the 2017 policy that was mentioned by the one delegate, that was shot down. And I support the 2021 policy, and I hope you all reject the 2022 version. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Emily Potts.
Hello, I'm Emily Potts. I'm from Orange, Virginia. I represent Pride at Work, Orange Equity, and Pride Sport in Culpeper, Virginia. This is my first public outing, and I'm doing it in a big way. I am a transgender parent of a non-binary student. A year ago, I came out to my student. She turned around and came out to me. They use they, them pronouns. The Orange County registration asked for male, female, non-binary. I put non-binary and her name, KJ. Her name is Kelsey Ray. She goes by KJ. I've heard many people say, that the parents need to know. My child came to me. If your child doesn't come to you, they don't feel safe. The parent knows. Most parents know about their child. My mom knew. My dad knew. My mom wasn't accepting. It took me 47 years to come out. And here I am doing it in a public way that I never expected I'd be able to do. Just, this is wrong, totally wrong. So that's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. Heather Bowe. Heather Bowe.
Hello. My name is Heather Bowe. I live in Albemarle County. I'm a child of 2 retired public school teachers.
And I truly grew up in our public school system. And around the dinner table most nights, our conversations were about their students. What were their struggles? What were their challenges? What were their needs? And underlying all of that was, how is this going to shape their lives, you know? How were their moments at school and the things that they needed and who was going to address them going to play out in their life long term? And that really informed my decision later in life to pursue work in advocacy for abused and neglected children. And I see this so clearly as child abuse. I mean, it's psychological abuse. And I think we have the evidence and you have the input from professionals. And I just ask that every child have the ability to see there's a place for themselves in school, to see that like there's a place where I can safely exist, because without that, they can't envision a future. And that's why we see the statistics that you've heard so much about. I understand the value of parental rights. Certainly within the court system, I've seen that battle go back and forth, you know, many times. But it's a child's best interest that matters. And that's what you're charged with too, right? Serving children. Their best interest should come first. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Geo Nicholson.
Good afternoon. Hi, everybody. I'm Gene Nicholson, representing the Virginia chapter of Pride at Work. Thank you for letting me speak. I would just like to say that I'm here to state that we oppose the model policy of 22 that is detrimental to students and youth in Virginia. I also have an education degree. I've been in the state of Virginia since 1978. I'm a proud grandparent of 3 grandchildren that live in Loudoun County. I'm a resident of Culpeper County, and attend various school board meetings around the state to help out where I can. People need to be heard. People need to be listened to. People need to be felt where they're at and represented by people that look and act like them. I think I failed to say that my pronouns are they, them, and I'm also a proud veteran of the United States Army, so I know a little bit about this. I just recently retired at 62, and this has become my life's work in the state of Virginia, to help people understand that we're not different. We're all the same. We just want to be heard and cared for and respected. And there is mutual ground here that can be worked on. I heard many things saying, we're not here yet, we're not there yet. What about this? What about that? That's the good work that's being done here. Okay, and I challenge you all to continue working on it. And I'm proud to say that I'm a Virginian with all of you, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, sir. Christine Lee. There were 3 names, all, and I don't know whether you want each one in 3 minutes or 2 minutes, whether.
We just wanted to stand to kind of emphasize everything. So we are medical students from VCU, and we just want to emphasize that we agree with the letter that was read by our peer, and then just quickly finish it since she didn't get a chance. When we say that this proposed policy will devastate our children's safety, we just wanted to emphasize that we really do know this from witnessing it ourselves. This policy will negatively impact the health of and well-being of our children and lead to higher rates of suicide and self-harm. And we demand that this proposal be denied, and then we as a community support that this policy will cause harm to our future patients.
Okay, and that she's joined by Maggie Rosanto.
Yeah, Maggie Rosano, Christine Lee,
And Joseph Gallagher.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you all. Allison Chapman.
Thank you. My name is Allison Chapman. I'm a resident of Charlottesville, Virginia. I have over 10 years of service as a first responder. I'm a transgender activist and legislative lobbyist with the Virginia chapter of the Trans Radical Activist Network. And more importantly, I'm a mom of a first grader. I'm here today to strongly oppose the model policies as proposed by the Board of Education and Governor Youngkin. I can assure you that if these policies get enacted, it will have major effects on both the economy of Virginia and the health and well-being of trans children that reside here. When these policies were proposed, I did not live in this state. We seriously considered not moving to Virginia over this issue, and we will leave the state if we have a child that comes out as transgender. In 2016, North Carolina instituted a transgender bathroom ban, and it cost their economy an estimated $3.76 billion. That would have devastating impacts on our state. Yesterday, I was explaining to my first grader that I was going to be gone all day today because I had to drive down to Richmond and appear here. I explained that there are people who are mean to trans kids, and I needed to go talk to the people who make the laws to tell them not to let that happen. Their response was, if I became trans and they come to get me, I will just run away from them. That's a direct quote. Governor Youngkin is trying to make this state a place where a 7-year-old has to consider running away for their personal safety and their ability to exist as they are. And let me tell you, if they come to me and tell me that they are transgender, believe me, we will run. We will run from our city, we will run from our state, we will run from our country if that is what we need to do to keep them safe. I can't believe I'm having to sit here today and beg that we protect some of the most vulnerable children in our society. This will cause the death of children. There is blood on the hands of every person who does not attempt to stop this awful policy. So I'm asking everyone in this room, do you want to be the final straw, cause a child to commit suicide? Do you want to be the reason for major economic damages to our state? Please join me in opposition and do everything in your power to stop it. Codify the right to transgender health care and make Virginia a safe place for trans kids.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alan Dow. Alan Dow. Then I suppose we have people in the virtual world. How many speakers do we have? Do you know?
I'm not sure in terms of in opposition or in support. Do you have 17 attendees? Can those in opposition please raise your hand? Or in, yeah, opposition, please. Okay. Looks like we've got one speaker, so just a moment. We've got Rachel Twigg.
And myself. Sorry, I think I clicked the wrong button. I'm in support of the model policies. Do you want me to step out for a minute?
Go ahead.
Okay, so since I'm here, let me, I'll share my thoughts briefly with you. Thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak. Okay, so I am a mother of 2. I have a boy and a girl, and I always assumed that I would send my children to public school. But I will not send them to a school if I cannot trust the administration or the teachers. I will not send them to a school if they are taught the regressive and pseudoscience of gender identity ideology, or the insidious lies that they could be born in the wrong body, or that biological sex is a social construct. We are putting these ideas into kids' heads that something might be wrong with their body, and then we wonder why there's an increase in distress and an increase in suicide. And I especially will not send my daughter to a school where she will have to share her bathrooms and her locker rooms with boys who, quote, identify as girls. Several of you have stated that a trans student's presence in a locker room is not a threat, but I would like to say you are wrong. This is a violation of girls' boundaries. This is a form of sexual abuse. And many women across the country, many women and girls have already voiced their distress, their fears, their discomfort, and instances of assault even, and they've been ignored and gaslit. I am prepared to forego any future personal goals or professional goals in order to homeschool my children. But I know that homeschooling is not a viable or optimal experience or option for many families. So I ask not only for my children, but for all of the children of Virginia to please support the 2022 model policies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Are there others virtually?
Yes. Up next we have Stephanie. Pardon me. Stephanie Lundquist Aurora.
I'm Stephanie Lundquist Aurora of Fairfax County, and I appreciate this opportunity to share my perspective. In 2018, a publishing house approached me to write a book on coping with gender fluidity. I drafted the manuscript when the political landscape on issues of gender identity was much different. I had great compassion for and was inspired by the family of a child with gender dysphoria in the journey that they embarked upon together, a journey in a rural area where the public middle school administrators didn't constantly pose gender identity questions and parents were not the enemy. More recently, particularly in Fairfax County, parents are treated as the enemy. Perhaps that's because so many of our school board members aren't parents themselves. Anyhow, I'd like to share a story with you. In July this year, a nervous teacher approached me. After introducing herself with shaking hands, she held out her phone displaying images of slides of FCPS's most recent staff training, pictures she didn't believe she was allowed to capture and share, but she felt she must for the sake of parents. The purpose of the training administered in late spring this year was to inform the teachers and staff that they were not permitted to notify the parents of changes in their children's gender identity, a phenomenon now so prevalent, especially in middle school, there seems to be a social contagion element involved. Not only are parents' rights to raise their children formally being dismantled, but many Virginians are afraid to even discuss it. When I subsequently called other FCPS teachers and staff to discuss the new teacher training, they spoke with me and they opposed it, but they refused to provide comments to the media because they were afraid of reprisal. Similarly, during my son's games and practices, when I discussed mandated pronouns and co-ed bathrooms with parents on the sidelines of turf fields, they fervently opposed them, but when I asked them to speak out, they politely declined. They say they don't want to lose their jobs or be publicly villainized. While I hold a live and let live mentality and oppose all forms of bullying, a tyrannical minority has taken transgender policy in public schools so far that it is threatening freedom and parental rights. We need to reset the scales, and I believe that Governor Youngkin's model policies will help us to do that. Thanks for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. Who's next?
Up next, Jessica McLean.
Hi, can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, thank you for hearing my comments today. My name is Jessica McLean. I'm a mother of 4. I'm in King William. And I wanted to speak in support of the governor's model guidance. I believe it protects all children while giving a gut check to our educational establishment that has been pushing parents away for decades. Any parent confronted with a difficult issue of a child with gender confusion should have the right to privately guide them through that delicate situation, not be threatened or excluded by the school. The rest of us should have the assurance that our child will not be forced to do, see, or say things that go against our values as parents or the rights of our children as individuals. This policy should be a reminder. In fact, Youngkin's election should be a reminder that the majority of parents like myself do not agree to participate in the lie that a school knows best for our children, or that it is the purview of schools to explore, teach, or encourage the sensitive subject of gender confusion. This policy not only protects children's rights, but also children suffering from a well-documented social contagion called rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is being inflamed and exploited by trans activists and influencers such as those in attendance there today. They report to you high suicidal ideation and self-harm in the transgender population, which is true and does in fact show that they're suffering deeply. But this is nothing more than emotional extortion, because they will not tell you that there is absolutely no scientific evidence that gender affirming care or affirmation changes their outcomes whatsoever. In fact, rapid onset gender dysphoria is literally too new to have any long-term studies on outcomes to report at all. I would like to, by giving a stern warning to these trans activist groups that are concerned with following the law in gender policy. One day in the not so distant future, you will be on the receiving end of lawsuits from the same transitioned youth you're speaking on behalf of today, when they finally reach adulthood and realize what has been done to them. I ask that Virginia protect children, protect young bodies and minds, and uphold the rights of parents in education. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Who's next?
Up next is Mark Spooner.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I almost fell out of my chair here when I heard the ACLU representative state statute directing the development of model policies overrides the fundamental right of parents. According to her, the Department of Education cannot consider parents at all in developing policies on how to deal with transgender students. I have the statute in front of me. Nothing in the statute says that the interests of parents or the rights of parents are to be ignored. And any claim to that effect or any policy to that effect would be outrageous. A 12-year-old who has mental health issues is not in a position, is not competent to make a binding decision that the schools will automatically support as to what their gender is going to be. Parents have a right to be in the loop for a very good reason. They know their children best. They know why a student might be having the issues that he or she is having. The other point I'd like to make is that a lot of these arguments that are being made by the opponents are based on the false assumption that the proposed model policies discriminate against transgender students. That's not true at all. The policies fully support inclusion, understanding, and anti-bullying. Permitting parents to be involved in raising their kids is not discriminatory. Parents are not the enemy. If there are rare cases where parents are the enemy of their kids, there are statutes in place where the state can step in and deal with that. But they should not routinely be dealt with in the policies of the schools as if they are the enemies. Finally, the point I'd like to make is that the objectors seem to think that the only students who have rights are transgender students. Others have rights too.
Your time's up. You can submit your comments in writing and.
All right, thank you very much.
We'll make them part of the record. Thank you, sir. Who's next?
Next is Donna May.
Dear members, my name is Donna Machen from Matthews, Virginia. I wanted to speak to you today to let you know that I wholeheartedly support the revisions Governor Youngkin has made to the transgender model policies. As a former public school teacher in Virginia for 7 years, I respected the constitutional rights of parents who opted out of the family life education curriculum. And as a homeschooling parent, today, I enjoy the freedom to educate my children in a manner consistent with my faith and values. I regularly attend my local county school board meetings with my husband and 2 children where we stay abreast of policy changes and speak out about issues which we feel would be detrimental to the children in our county. We have been greatly concerned about the harmful transgender policies enacted in 2021. On the other hand, the 2022 model policies on the privacy, dignity, and respect for all students and parents in Virginia's public schools restore the values upon which our state and nation were founded. Thankfully, Governor Youngkin has affirmed the rights of Virginia's parents to direct the care of bringing and education of their children. I don't think anyone should be forced to use preferred pronouns. I do think parents should be fully informed about the welfare of their child. God really did make male and female. Students should be able to participate in athletic activities with only their own sex. It's time to roll back the agenda to those who would transform our society and culture away from the moral foundation so necessary to sustain a republic. I am delighted with the efforts that Governor Youngkin has made to protect our youth. Let's keep up the good work. Thank you. And my daughter, Ruth, has also signed up. May she go now?
She does not have her hand up, so I'm going to address those who do first. All right, next up is Chelsea Quintern.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Chelsea Quintern. I'm in Orange County, and I'm mother of 2, almost 3. So in 2020, there are many precedents set by the prior government as they determine how laws and mandates are upheld. Unfortunately, many of us are blind to see these things until our children were forced out of schools, taxpayers were told they were non-essential, and our community was split into over pseudoscience. 2 years later, we are still learning how to re-engage with one another. Fortunately, these forward mandates open the door for parents to really see what's going on in our schools. Parents are re-engaged and revitalized to pick up the torch and say no more. This new administration was voted in under the campaign promise of parental rights. This platform was overwhelmingly accepted across both sides of the aisle. As we know, a sword cuts both ways. This follows suit. Though we may not agree with how one another parents, it should be no debate that parents matter, and only a child's parent can determine what is best for them, with very few exceptions. The Supreme Court and the Commonwealth of Virginia both uphold the position that parents have the absolute right to the upbringing and education of their children. This means that parents get to determine what is best for their children. Working in criminal justice, I've learned the importance of both sides of the argument. There comes a time when the court system needs to intervene for the well-being of the minor. However, this is an outlier, and it is proven that more often than not, parents have the best interests of their child as motivation for their actions. When there's evidence to the contrary, there's a process involved to protect the child, and it's not as arbitrary as school administrators could determine. Bottom line, schools absolutely cannot determine what is best for all. This is why it's important to continue to bring parents into the room. The school building's purpose is to educate children. One area we need to focus our direction are our test scores and showing the need for improvement. It is not established to allow left-leaning organizations to push for Marxist ideologies such as VSBA, VEA, and VAS. These nonpartisan organizations have been pushing an agenda for far too long, and it's time we stand up to them and say enough. So in sum, I'm supporting the model policy on the privacy, dignity, and respect for all students and parents in Virginia's public schools. It's time we protect all citizens in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Who's next?
Up next is Sandra Davis, please. Sandra?
Sorry, I'm here. Good morning, I'm Sandra Davis, or good afternoon now, a mother of 3 from Fairfax County. I want my child's school to hide sensitive information from me about my child, said no parent ever. Sorry. I was actually in a car accident on the way down here, so that's the tow truck. Okay. The governor's policy is about guardrails for children in school, all the children. Guardrails against pushing a child down a path when clearly the exponential increases in children experiencing this issue denotes the likelihood of a degree of social phenomenon, and the underlying causes should be examined before blind affirmation by unqualified school personnel. It doesn't say a child can't do this or that. It merely says that a guardian must sign off before formal accommodations that also affect the rights of others are given. For the people who say, well, if your child doesn't tell you, there's something wrong with your parenting. As soon as you say my child would never, here they go nevering like they've never before. Imagine going into your child's educational record and seeing a name that you don't recognize. This does happen to parents in Fairfax County. It happened to a close friend of mine. The school hid her child's social transition for a year without the parent's knowledge. Can you imagine this happening to you? While the intent may be kindness, to exclude parents from the equation is in fact a recipe for disaster. Is it fair that a diagnosis, a letter from a licensed professional or a guardian is not required to garner a whole support team to help a child socially transition, being that this is completely contrary to the experience of our special ed students, students with dyslexia and other disabilities who are waiting for their services, and they have more than assertions. And adult fervently points out that these children have higher rates of suicide. I can't help thinking that is exactly why parents need to be involved. Every organization that is involved with minor children, whether that be scouting, 4-H, sports, or religious entity, all have training that discusses the fact that non-related adults who tell children it's okay to keep secrets from parents as grounds for calling them. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is?
Our next speaker is Harry Jackson.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Harry Jackson, and I'm with Parents for Common Sense and Reasonable Judgment. I am for this current policy because it does make it is common sense and it is sound judgment. It does emphasize safety, privacy, and fairness for our youth. We talk about safety with transgender policies. Parents should be notified if their child is experiencing gender dysphoria. It is a mental health condition, and it is a health condition, and it requires treatment. To keep parents in the dark without due diligence or to notify them under the presumption that they are a harm to the child instead of being an aid to the child, failing to identify those resources and capacity for wraparound support to support those children is negligent and it's reckless. Not only that, but school administrators are not resourced. They're not professionals to accurately diagnose gender dysphoria. They are not the expert. They are not the experts. Parents should be informed. That policy makes sense. We can also talk about with access to the bathrooms of the gender identity. I mean, again, these students with these previous policy were never diagnosed with true cases of gender dysphoria. Other students do have rights. And as we saw in Loudoun County in the Scott Smith case, that what happens when you get when things go wrong, when a student can be assaulted. And then we can talk about with sports. That one, you should have only gender assigned at birth sports, because there is a significant difference. For example, in the contact sports, basketball, soccer, lacrosse, particularly lacrosse. Let's think about that one, where the average male shot speed's 85 miles an hour. That's in an Indian rubber ball, and those children are wearing helmets. In girls lacrosse, it's a 45 mile an hour shot, and they're not wearing helmets. Can you only imagine what damage that could be done with an errant shot that is made? So again, my name is Harry Jackson, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Our next speaker is
Diane Dixon. Dion, apologies if I pronounced it wrong.
That's okay. Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me to voice my opinion. I'm a graduate of Fairfax County Public Schools. I'm a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, a Virginia licensed high school physics and technology education teacher, a father of Fairfax County Public Schools student, and a Virginia resident for over 30 years. I was asked to speak here today by Moms for Liberty Fairfax County in support of the 2022 model policies. I have a couple quotes from studies conducted over the years. A study by Straull et al. In 2012 states, children and youth served by mental health system of care providers show increases in emotional and behavioral strengths and improved relationships with peers and adults when families are engaged. And Child Welfare Information Gateway in 2010 states, when child welfare staff involves families in the decision-making process and in developing the plans that affect them and their children, they are more invested in the plans and committed to achieving objectives and complying with treatment. I'm not here today to cast aspersions on the LGBTQIA+ community, as some of our opponents accuse us of. I'm here to decry the decision to remove parental involvement and consent from the discussion. The state simply has no right to keep vital information about my child's societal and behavioral development a secret from me, as the 2020 policy allows schools to do in direct violation of Code of Virginia 1-240.1. Dividing parents against their children is a proven recipe for disaster in any child's development, regardless of his or her gender identity. Thank you for your time.
Who's next?
Next up is Diana Maurer.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, other members of the commission. Thank you very much for your time. My name is Diana Maurer, and I'm in Alexandria. I've been a resident of the state of Virginia for the last 30 plus years, parent of two wonderful, now young men. I'm also a transgender woman, and I'm the board of directors of Equality Virginia. So as you can probably imagine, I am strongly opposed to the new proposed policies coming from the Virginia Department of Education. Among other things, those policies are cruel in that they specifically target transgender youth for additional undermining of their dignity and self-respect. I find those policies to be duplicitous because they talk about and they wrap themselves in words like dignity and respect, when in fact they try to do just completely the opposite. And finally, I think most of greatest importance to this particular commission is that these proposed policies are unlawful. They are designed to, in theory, implement a piece of statute that the General Assembly debated and adopted more than 2 years ago. When the Virginia Values Act was adopted by the General Assembly 2 years ago, it specifically protected LGBTQ+ folks in the state of Virginia against discrimination. These policies would do just the opposite. So I would encourage the commission to act in your role to propose or to voice your strong objections to these policies, stop this end run around the General Assembly, and send up two powerful messages. First, that Virginia values and respects everyone's right to learn, to live, and to work. And second, that Virginia takes democratic processes and democratic institutions seriously. We've talked about many important issues this morning and now well into this afternoon. These are appropriately issues to be raised within the General Assembly. They should be part of legislation, not through some backdoor effort to impose proposed policies on the children of Virginia. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Who's next?
Next is Zach Ritz.
Thank you. My name is Zach Ritz. I'm the pastor of Veritas Church in Warrenton, Virginia. We have a growing congregation of about 80 adults and 60 kids. We're right here in the heartland of Fauquier County. We are in support of the 2022 model policy by Governor Youngkin. And it comes as no surprise to us that the county just south of us, Culpeper County, that they would have already adopted, actually unanimously, right, adopted the 2022 model policy. I think it's probably because they don't want to become like what happened with Loudoun County, just north of us. All the things that have been happening there with the keeping from the parents what the teachers have been teaching the students, not letting them involved in even counseling situations. So we believe that this is a danger. This is a danger for us, our parental rights, even here in Fauquier County. Not only parental rights that even I really appreciate with one person quoted, the fundamental right to the upbringing, right? The upbringing and the education and care of our children. We believe that Virginia holds that. We believe that that is given to us by God. And we believe that, yes, 2 + 2 = 4, right? Chairman, I believe that even still H2O is water, okay? And then if we talk X and Y chromosomes, there's male and female. But it's a whole nother question if we ask, well, what does that mean that I'm male? What does it mean that you're female? What does it mean to be the man that God has created for you to be? Or what does it mean for you to be the woman that God has created for you to be? Well, now we're going to have to ask the question and go to church, and we're going to have to learn, what does that mean? And so what I'm going to ask is that you not separate truth and love. Veritas Church, Veritas means truth, Latin for truth. And we believe that truth is not separate from love, but that the two go hand in hand.
Thank you, sir. Who's next?
Next up is Vic Nichols.
Females' identity, humanity, and privacy are threatened. Rape is inflicted and forcibly silenced. Our side speaks up and is retaliated against, subject to public abuse like the AAP and this commission did earlier. My family doesn't use my nickname. You don't see me losing sleep. You support females having abortion for power over their bodies and men having no say. But when it comes to our most vulnerable areas, locker rooms, bathrooms, males brutally, unilaterally dictate their free access to females' body and privacy. Social contagion not occurring in other countries is no excuse to violate us. Former LCPS Superintendent Zigner has a lawsuit on the firing of a spec ed teacher, former victim of sexual assault, suffering extreme emotional distress after being repeatedly groped by a student. Their suggestion was the teacher wear an apron to slow down the penetration when the student touched her private parts. The World Professional Association for Transgender Health requires legal age for treatment consent. Code 54.1-2974, surgical sterilization of minors requires a court order. Medical sterilization with drugs does not. Code 18.2-387 on indecent exposure remains on the books to be used. The Tavistock UK Gender Clinic is going to be sued by 1,000 families due to rushing into life-altering experimental puberty blockers. The HHS guidance documents gender-affirming care in young people wasn't issued by their FDA. It was by the Office of Population Affairs dealing with family planning, teenage pregnancy, and adoption. With all of these issues, women, girls, females deserve their rights to privacy and not to be violated. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols.
Up next is Ruth Macon.
I'm from Matthews, Virginia, and I would like to share sections of an article from the Daily Wire by Christiana Buttons called G Transgender, Chloe Cole gives powerful testimony against gender-affirming care at Capitol. Here's an 18-year-old young woman's story. I believe Americans deserve to know the truth about this radical, perverse ideology marketed as necessary and life-saving healthcare. Chloe was introduced to gender ideology online at 11 and then identified as transgender boy at 12. She was prescribed puberty blockers and testosterone at 13. Chloe gave shocking circumstances of trauma at 15 and went under the knife for a radical double mastectomy. This was after I was sexually assaulted at school by a male student. I lived my life in constant hatred of my breasts. She added that she attempted to flatten her chest with constrictive materials through breast binding, which is recommended by the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, which led to her breast and rib cage becoming deformed. The gender clinic presented my parents with, "Would you rather have a dead daughter or a live son? This is not informed consent," she said. Only 1 year after her surgery at 16, Chloe realized that she had made a mistake. "I realized the beauty of motherhood was stolen. I realized after maturing a bit more that child does not know who they are at 12. There are many transgenders now speaking out. They are ignored by institutions. It's too late for me, and time is running out for these children. There's no second chance at childhood. We must do our best as adults to guide our children to a pathway that leads to healthy bodies and minds instead of depression and disfigurement. How many more children's bodies will be destroyed before you actually listen? What is the sweet spot? 100, 200, 1,000? Cole ended her speech. No child deserves to suffer under the knife of gender-affirming surgeons. America's children, all children, deserve better. Please accept Governor Youngkin's model policy."
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Who's next?
The last speaker is Jennifer.
Senator Boysko?
Thank you so much. I appreciate your letting me testify. Mr. Chairman and members of the Joint Commission on Administrative Rules, I'm Senator Jennifer Boysko. I represent the 33rd Senate District, and I served as the chief patron of SB 161, which directed the Department of Education to develop and make available to each school board model policies concerning the treatment of transgender students in public elementary and secondary schools in 2020. It passed with bipartisan support and it was signed into law. The model policies we created in accordance with SB 161 were crafted after numerous public meetings with input from parents, students, teachers, and stakeholders, along with thousands of public comments in 2021. I happen to have served on that VDOE work group, and I'll just reiterate that parents were members of the stakeholder work group. I don't believe that Governor Youngkin and his administration's changes in 2022 to the proposed model policies for the treatment of transgender students complies with the legal requirements outlined in my bill. SB 161 specifically requires that policies for the treatment of transgender students be based on evidence-based best practices. However, the proposed model policies appear to be based on politics rather than well-being and rights of the trans students. I urge the Joint Commission to carefully consider the legal requirements of SB 161 and to ensure that any policies put forward for the treatment of transgender students are fully compliant with the legislation and based on evidence-based best practices. We are obligated as legislators to protect the rights and the well-beings of all of our students, including those who are transgender. And I urge the Joint Commission to consider these changes that Governor Youngkin has proposed. Virginia absolutely can create a welcoming and inclusive and safe environment for all, and do so respecting the law as we set forward. I thank you for your time and appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, Senator Boysko. Okay, that's the last public commenter online?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's the last virtual public comment.
Thank you very much, Nikki. Okay, as we discussed earlier, the role of this commission is pretty limited. What we can do is object to these two policies if we choose to. We don't have to. Is there a motion?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have two separate motions, and the first one has to do with the emissions trading.
Okay.
I would like to object to the proposed Regulation 9 VA C5140 regulations for emission trading that we heard about earlier.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second, Mr. Chairman, Delegate Rome.
Is there discussion of the motion?
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Wampler.
A point of order. Are the electronic members going to be allowed to participate in the vote?
I think that was part of the policy we adopted at the last meeting. They can vote. They don't count toward the quorum, but they can participate, including voting after the meeting starts.
10-4. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
That specifically was a point we went back and forth on during the last meeting when we were adopting a virtual policy. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of this, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Okay. I think we know what they are, but you can have the clerk take the roll just to be careful.
Senator Cosgrove, Senator Evan. Aye. Senator Edwards. Senator Locke. Aye. Delegate Bagby. Aye. Delegate Head.
No.
Delegate Robinson. No. Delegate Rome.
Aye.
Delegate Walker. No. Delegate Wampler.
No.
Vice Chair Helmer. Chair Deeds.
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 5 in favor, 4 opposed. Motion carries.
Is there another motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I would like to move that we formally object to guidance document 2022 model policies on the privacy, dignity, and respect for all students that alters the 2021 model transgender policy.
Okay, is there a second on that motion?
Second, Mr. Chairman, Delegate Rome.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I have a substitute motion for that, and that
Delegate Head's got a substitute motion.
is that we pass by this vote based on it violating, and I believe we would have Office of Attorney General would like to suggest that we have seek an Office of the Attorney General to give opinion as to whether or not it is proper for us to even entertain such a motion.
So the motion is to pass by the motion or to pass by for the day, I guess, the motion to object. And so that's been seconded. So you want to call the roll on that motion?
Senator Cosgrove, Senator Evan. No. Senator Edwards, Senator Locke. No. Delegate Bagby. No. Delegate Head. Aye. Delegate Robinson. Aye. Delegate Rome.
No.
Delegate Walker. Aye. Delegate Wampler.
Aye.
Vice Chair Helmer, Chair Deeds.
No.
That's 4 yes, 5 no. Motion does not carry.
Okay, the primary motion is what we go back to, and that's the motion to file an objection. And I'd ask you to call the roll on that.
Senator Cosgrove, Senator Evan.
Yes.
Senator Edwards, Senator Locke. Yes. Delegate Bagby. Yes. Delegate Head. No. Delegate Robinson. No. Delegate Rome.
Aye.
Delegate Walker. No. Delegate Wampler.
No.
I'm sorry, what did you say? No. Okay. Vice Chair Helmer, Chair Deeds.
Yes.
5 yes, 4 no. Motion carries.
Okay, there's nothing else to do. I don't think. Does anyone else have anything good for the good of the order? If not, we're adjourned.
Sorry, guys. I forgot to set my timer. So, that was that. We will go over tomorrow replays of key moments and all that stuff because there was a lot of utter BS. We'll just say that. People who don't understand the law, they don't understand parental rights, they don't understand the actual law that was written because my guess is from what I caught or remember, nobody actually read the actual law, and it's not a backdoor anything. Whoever wrote the law wrote it badly. They thought they would never lose the governor, the House, or the Senate, much less the Department of Education when they wrote it. Sorry, you did, so you wrote the law bad. Can't change that. So it's not a backdoor anything. It's just education policy, period. So we will go through all of that tomorrow, but I just wanted to get that on public record. So hope you guys have a good night. Bye.